Okay, let's get started. Somehow I cannot start my video because I'm not the host, but I'm just going to go ahead and kick off this Python session. Welcome to the Data Fundamentals course. We're going to spend 4 sessions together to learn Python programming. I just want to introduce the agenda to everyone, what we're going to cover today, and then I will help you understand the Python ecosystem and also, show you some interesting demo. We're going to work with OpenAI API today. Going to do some sentiment analysis, but this is not a machine learning course. This is not a data science course. It's just a fundamental course to cover Python programming. But we're going to introduce some really interesting, small exercises and use cases to help you become interested in programming. So we will be covering software installation. So in case you have not installed Python yet, I'll just go through that really quickly so that folks who are reviewing the recording later, they'll be able to find some useful information. And then we'll be covering the basics of Python. So we'll introduce the capabilities of Python, and I'll do some use case sharing. And then we'll move on to the actual lesson. And then we will have a Jupyter notebook that we're going to walk through together. And you can code along with me. I will slow down. It's not a ton of content. I'll make sure that you can follow me to complete the exercises together today. Okay. All right. Couple of housekeeping stuff. Some of you guys are asking about where the materials and stuff. So this is I think I can start my video now. Okay, cool. This is the learning portal. If you're new here, you need to go to learn.weclouddata.com and you need to sign up, create a new account. If you don't have an account or you have created an account, but you cannot see the data fundamentals course, you need to let us know. But I think we granted access to everyone. And sometimes if you cannot log in, it's probably the password issue. But once you log in, you'll be able to find a course in your dashboard called Data Fundamentals. And this is the program page. So we're moving on to module 2, Python Fundamentals. I've just uploaded the material because this morning decided to change the exercise. So, created some new material today to make it more interesting. So that's why the upload is delayed a little bit, but you can go ahead and click on, I would recommend you click on the Python introduction demo, follow along. That should lead you to this notebook view. You can't run anything here. The platform doesn't have the feature yet, but you can just click on the button to download the notebook, and I'll teach you how to load that into to Jupyter so we can do the lab together. And there's the solution here as well, so you can just click on the solution. Okay. For those of you who are not familiar with the learning portal, just so you know, you can go to Discord. Make sure you go to the short courses, data fundamentals. And then on the top, you will be able to see the threads. Click on the threads and go find Python material. I think I uploaded just now. Okay, it's on the top. So Python material, click on that. So we have the zip file here, lecture 1 Python introduction. It basically has the 2 notebooks. One of them is the solution. Okay, so you can download it from here. So for lecture 2 to 4, I'll upload materials here as well. All right, to access the recording, again, so after each lecture, the video will be processed and we'll upload that to the learning portal, and you can access them through YouTube as well. Just go to youtube.com at WeCloudData. Okay. And then you can go to WeCloud Open courses. And then there's the data fundamentals course. Okay, so just click on this link. And then you should be able to find the recordings of all the lectures. So right now, I think we should have all 4 SQL lectures recordings, okay? All right, we'll take one break in between, and I'll pause from time to time to check out the Q&A section and try my best to answer some of your questions. If I cannot get to all the questions, I'll make sure that I address them on Discord later. All right, learning portal link, learn.weclouddata.com. So let me send it to, let me actually send it to Discord. Okay, learn.weclouddata.com. All right, now I will help you figure out the access later. Let's move on to the lecture. All right, let's talk about the Python ecosystem first. I'll, give you a quick introduction to Python. So I have some slide presentation, not a lot of slides. We'll go through them quickly, and then I'll show you some interesting exercise, like demos, and then we'll move on to the coding part, okay? Sorry, it's very slow. My computer crashed. It's still being repaired right now, so I'm using someone else's computer that doesn't have a lot of memory. This is just like training AI models. You need to have patience. Sometimes it can be very slow. All right, welcome to Python Fundamentals. Module 0, quick introduction. Why we have module 0 is because Python is 0 index based. If you don't understand what that means, we will cover that in lecture 2, where we talk about data types and stuff, okay? Okay, so what is Python? It's an interpreted high-level and general-purpose programming language. It's kind of boring definition, but the good thing to know is that it's very popular, and I'll show you how powerful Python is. It's not the best programming language, right? Depending on how you define what is a good programming language, some people will go with, popularity. Python is indeed very popular, especially among the, web development, as well as data science and machine learning. I think Python right now is best known for its capability in machine learning and AI. And even if like the package, or the software is not written originally in Python, but people like to just add, provide Python API access, which means if the software is written in other languages like Java or, Scala or Rust, but it can still use Python to access, the programming like the library. That's the cool part. And Python is widely adopted, mainly because it's such a free and powerful community. A lot of people use it, and there are a ton of open source projects built around Python. A lot of times people will basically go with convenience. And for most of the data analytics professionals out there, maybe speed and latency is not the biggest concern, right? For software engineers, if you would like to build robust systems, you want the software to run really, fast. But for data analytics, the difference between 1 second and 5 seconds sometimes is not that obvious, and people care more about the analytical results, right? And the ease of use is more important, and that's sort of why Python is not the fastest programming language. And the other day I was looking at an article saying that Python and Ruby are 2 of the languages that consume the most amount of like energy, which means it's not really a green programming language, right? But it's useful and popular for lots of good reasons, and it's adopted by many companies. Some of the popular applications that we use on a daily basis, they were originally written in Python, or they're still like mostly built around Python. For example, Instagram. But it doesn't mean Instagram only use Python to build the entire app. But Python is heavily used, right? They use Django, I believe. And Uber, they have Python applications. I'm talking about web application or software built using Python, not just the machine learning part, right? Um, but why should we consider Python as a data scientist? First of all, the demand is really good, right? You're here probably because you heard about Python. Earlier today, I saw someone saying that I'm only here for the Python part. So you definitely have done the research. You know Python is very popular. It's in demand. Most of the data and cloud jobs will require Python skills. And that's why people are considering, learning Python. It's also like always among the top 3, right? Most in demand skills for data professionals. Okay, it has one of the most active and amazing communities. There are many awesome libraries and frameworks built around Python, and I'll show you some of these today. Okay, what can Python do? Python can be used for a lot of different things, and I'll show you some real examples of how we can use Python to build very simple AI applications with some front end and back end setup. I'll show you how Python can be used for training machine learning models and doing visualization. We're going to build a chatbot, but not from scratch. We're just using the OpenAI and Streamlit API. I'll show you the demo. I'll share the code. Very easy to get started. A lot of times these capabilities have been built by other developers and shared among the communities, right? And you can just take them. And I think that's one of the reasons why Python is becoming so popular. And R is another very popular data science programming language. But unfortunately, Python has, been gaining the upper hand in the competition. And I don't think R will ever be able to catch up with Python. And I think I sort of tuned into one like podcast, and I think the person who originally built some of the AI capabilities at Amazon for R, I forgot his name, but he said there are not a lot of developers working on supporting AI in our ecosystem, and people are still mainly coming from statistical, like the traditional stats background. And that's why they sort of lost the battle on the AI side, and there's no way for them to catch up at this point. More reasons to consider Python for data science. But again, Python can be used for finance, right? People use it for algorithmic trading. It can be used to manipulate spreadsheet. You can use, if you come from Excel world or Google Sheet, and you used to write a lot of macros, VBAs, and Python can pretty much do most of those, right? You can use it to replace VBA and do automation. It can be used, for financial forecasting, time series forecasting. Python is very popular among DevOps, right, and cloud engineers because we can use Python and some of the automation-related libraries to do automation. It's popular among AI ops, which is like basically just using generative AI or whatever AI principles to automate IT work, right? And Python is pretty big in the cloud ecosystem because all of the cloud platforms has Python SDK, which means you can pretty much use Python to control the entire AWS stack, right? And Python can be used for big data. And a lot of people actually consider doing Python because of its capability, or it's well integrated into the big data ecosystem, such as Apache Spark, right? PySpark, and now Dask, Ray. There's some other libraries that, or I should say maybe framework that allows you to scale your data science and data analytics solutions. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And Python is most well known right now for data science and AI. I think it's a no-brainer. Deep learning, generative AI, right? Large language models, and machine learning and data analytics in general. Python is very popular for data engineering as well, because you can use it to automate workflow, for example, using libraries such as Apache Airflow, You can use prefect. If you're not familiar with these like names, don't worry. Along your learning path, I think you'll come across some of these packages, and you definitely need to get really good at it in order to work as a data scientist or as data engineer. Okay. All right. I'm going to go through 5 to 6 slides just to introduce some of the use cases, but then I'm actually going to give you some demo. It doesn't necessarily the demo is actually not the same as the slides you're going to see. Okay. First of all, this is a data fundamental course, right? So Python can be used to manipulate data, and it's pretty good at it. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is what we call a table or a spreadsheet, but it's structured data that has rows and columns, right? So it just looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and we can use Python to manipulate or analyze the data in this kind of format. The most popular library is called Python Pandas data frame, right? There are a lot of libraries in the Python ecosystem that are named after animals for some reason, but it's pretty cool. Python itself is a snake, and pandas is used for data manipulation. It's really good at manipulating structured data, right? And you can do database and data operations, such as filtering data, doing projections, aggregations, joins. You can do window functions in Python as well. Pretty much everything you can do in SQL, you can do that in Python in pandas, right? Then the question is, well, which one should we use? Is there still a good reason to use SQL? My answer is SQL is actually more important, for data analytics at least, because Python is really good, for, let's say, data scientists to manipulate data, let's say on a server, right? Python is running on a server, running on your computer. It's really good for ad hoc analysis, right? Or when you put that in production, then you sort of need data engineers to automate the entire workflow. In enterprise, right, or companies that have bigger data set, it doesn't make sense. Let's say your company has 1 million customers and they generate hundreds of millions of events and records, right? The data is 50 gig, 500 gig, or even terabytes of data. It doesn't make sense for you to download the data to your laptop and you use Python to analyze those data, even though Python has the capability, right? It creates all kinds of problems. You're keeping multiple copies of the data because you're going to download a copy of the data, and then your fellow data scientists download another copy of the data from the server the next day, and the data has been updated, right? So you guys are basically working with 2 different versions of the data, right? So that creates some sort of problems. So ideally, data is stored in a centralized, location, whether it's a data lake or a data warehouse, right? And once the data is being stored in, let's say a data warehouse, it's a powerful database, right? It's better to use SQL to analyze and process the data because it's running on a server or sometimes even a distributed server, right? Distributed cluster that has, tens or hundreds of servers running in parallel. So that is probably a much more scalable way to do data analytics. So that's why SQL is actually more important in the database world, in the data warehousing world, and in data engineering world in general. So you will be able to work as a data engineer without knowing Python, as long as you're super good at SQL, right? There's one profession called analytics engineering. They basically work on data warehouse. They use DBT. They work with SQL. It's very heavy SQL programming, and they are considered as data engineers as well. They do ETL, data extraction, ingestion, transformation as well. Python is really good for ad hoc data analysis. It means that if you have really large data sets, those data has been pre-processed using SQL in powerful databases, right? The data scientists want to process is usually much smaller than the raw data that's stored in database. So data scientists can actually extract those data and download them to their laptop or whatever servers, right, they're going to use for data analysis. So that you can build machine learning, you can do data visualization, do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Or when your data is really massive, that a regular relational database, right, couldn't handle the size of the data, then we're going to go with distributed computing, which is, the big data stuff. That's where actually Python becomes more useful, because we'll be working with libraries like Apache Spark. Well, I should call them frameworks, right? Apache Spark, but Spark supports both SQL and Python, even though it's written in Scala, right? Scala is just one of the programming languages. And the trend right now is whether you prefer SQL or Python, it doesn't matter. Most of the mainstream data analytics tools, they support both, right? But I think, if you would like to get into the industry, it's important to know both Python and SQL. And Python can do so much more when it comes to actual analytics, visualization, machine learning, and AI, right? But SQL is really good on the data engineering side. So if you look at the workflow or the life cycle of your data project, usually data will need to be, pre-processed first. That's usually happening in SQL databases. And then you extract the data into the data science environment, okay? All right, so that's one of the use cases, which is data processing. Python can be used for building dashboard. It can be used for data visualization as well. We are about to learn Power BI, right? And along the way, the way you might be learning, Looker, Tableau, these are popular commercial, dashboarding tools. Python has the capability, but you don't use Python to build a dashboard that's, used by the executives. There are some capabilities, for example, Plotly Dash or Streamlit. I'll do some demonstration on Streamlit today, but just keep in mind that data analysts and BI specialists, when they build dashboards, they will be using Power BI and Tableau, because most of the time data is prepared in databases using SQL, right? But data scientists, when they do machine learning and data exploration, they would prefer using Python, because Python is very flexible, and we'll use the Jupyter Notebook today. Right? You can do ad hoc analysis, and you can delete something and start from scratch really easily and quickly. But building a dashboard using Power BI, you don't get the speed. Like, it's going to take time, and you have to set up the data model and stuff. So when you want to build a dashboard that executives would like to read, you can spend a week on it, for example. But data scientists, they probably need to spend 15, 20 minutes or 2 hours to explore data. It's an overkill for you to use Power BI to build a dashboard, right? Maybe the outcome, the output, which is the machine learning model, you would like to explain to the business, it might be worth building a Power BI dashboard. But when you're doing experiments, right, you're trying all kinds of machine learning algorithms and build models, you're going to keep making changes. So let's forget about Power BI. For data analytics, right, and data science, you're going to focus on using Python, and you're going to visualize data using Python, because everything is in the same Jupyter Notebook environment. You don't have to leave the Python environment, right? Juggling multiple tools is not always ideal. Okay, so I'll introduce you to the world of Python data visualization. I'll introduce some of these packages, and I'll show you some demos. Okay, Python can be used for data representation, and that's very important. So the data structure behind Pandas data frame. So previously I showed you the data frame, right? This is like spreadsheet data, but behind these data structure, it's actually just NumPy arrays. This is a data structure called NumPy arrays, and on the right hand side we see an image. It is a handwritten digit, and it's number 5. right? But the way computer understands these images is that you need to turn them into numbers and digits, right? So it can understand it. So in this case, it's basically 28 by 28 pixels, okay? 700 something, right? Pixels. And each pixel here is represented using a numeric number. And the number is typically between 0 and 255. And this, so 253, right, is very close to 255, which is basically representing the black color, right? And the white background here is basically 0. So that represents the intensity of the color, right? If it's like the number 154, it's probably just like some kind of gray color. It maps to this pixel here, for example. Okay, so this is how images are represented in Python. If we would like to work with DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, right, Mid-Journey, we always need to upload the image to the server first, right? Or you can run local servers. The first step is really just to digitize or figure out how to represent the images, right? And it's usually represented using NumPy arrays. Okay. And this is a two-dimensional array. I won't spend time on explaining this in detail, but that's something you will need to learn in the data science course. Okay. But keep in mind that Python is very important when it comes to data representation. So you can use it to represent text, right? Images, audio, and spreadsheet-like data. Another use case is machine learning. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why Python became so popular, right? So on the right-hand side, you'll see some machine learning code. I'll introduce you to one example today, okay? When you learn machine learning, you realize that it's actually not a lot of lines of code. We're doing something called k-means clustering, but basically we're training the machine learning algorithm. It's called unsupervised learning algorithm. Each one of these data point, right, is basically a record in your data set. It has two dimensions, basically X column and Y column, two axes, right? And it's represented with some numeric numbers. And then you can map them onto, the coordinates, right, on this graph. And this machine learning algorithm called k-means is trying to automatically group the data points that are closer to each other, right, in terms of some sort of distance definition. And each dot or each record here basically belong to one cluster. It doesn't belong to multiple clusters. Okay. And clustering can be used for many different things. It can be used for anomaly detection as well, right? That's out of the scope of this discussion, but I just want to help you understand that you can use Python, right, in a Jupyter Notebook environment to train machine learning models. And then you can also visualize, right, do some sort of interactive visualization. It's very important for data scientists to run 2 lines of code, and then they will be able to visualize the results. If the result doesn't look good, they go back, make some changes, they run that again, and the graph will update, right? So that is a really good user experience. But if you save everything in a script and run that, you do that in production. But when data scientists are doing experimentation and training models, Jupyter Notebook is actually really good. Okay. All right. This is data fundamental course, so I will introduce some of the libraries I think you need to know. But I think I have a better version of this. But let me just go through these slides quickly to cover the basics. First of all, you need to understand that it's not just the Python core that you're learning. That's, the Python library itself, it's very powerful, right? But if you just use the pure Python distribution to do data science, it's very painful. You're going to build everything from scratch using the most fundamental data types. We'll talk about data types on next Wednesday, okay, in the next lecture. But the good thing about Python is that there's a whole ecosystem, right? So on top of the Python core, there are things like Jupyter Notebooks, right, that allows you to have interactive coding experience. NumPy we briefly talked about it. It's a library that allows us to sort of have numeric representation of, different kinds of data, right? And it can do like matrix, vector operations. And most of the machine learning data is represented in this kind of vector format, right? And on top of that, we'll see like statistics capability, data munging capability, visualization. So there are some libraries you need to know. Pandas is probably the most important library you need to be good at, right? That's for data manipulation. For statistics, linear algebra, SciPy is the scientific computing library, right? And it's built on top of Python and NumPy, okay? And Pandas also depends on both Python, right, and NumPy also depends on C as well. So there are a lot of dependencies among these libraries, but that's what makes Python really powerful, because it has a really big community. Okay, and on top of these, data preparation capability, also statistics, and linear algebra libraries, we have machine learning libraries, right? So you can use scikit-learn. This is probably one of the most popular machine learning library you need to be familiar with. Most people, start their machine learning journey with scikit-learn. PyTorch and TensorFlow, they're very, pretty dominant in the AI world, right, for deep learning. And PyTorch right now, I think is probably more popular already than, TensorFlow. And if you come from stats background and you would like to do a lot of statistical analyses, there's SciPy as well as stats models if you would like to do regression and you care about, things like, p-value and r-squares. Okay. All right. So what does that mean? It means when you learn Python, you need to understand the basics first, right? The basic syntax, the basic data types, right? And how to do control flow. You need to understand programming, logics. For new learners, most of the time they actually get stuck on this part, because this part is not fun at all, right? It's just like doing another computer class and learning programming, right? It has nothing to do with data science. It has nothing to do with AI, because we can learn Python to build web applications. You can use that to build robots and build games. So it's important to quickly move on to pandas and to know some of the higher level libraries, right? And will make your data science learning journey a lot more fun. Okay. All right. I'll help you break this down, because I think at the beginning of the journey, it's important for you to understand what's available out there. So when you're focusing on learning, the scikit-learn, the pandas, the NumPy and Python in a Jupyter Notebook environment, you need to know other capabilities of Python. But don't get overwhelmed by all of these information I'm going to share with you. And I think I'll tell you what you need to focus on. Right. All right. How to get started with Python. This is the learning path we have, but you can start with, the fundamental course, then move on to data science and machine learning. I think I covered this in the career guide section yesterday, the event I did it yesterday. You can watch the recording, so I won't spend that much time on this. Okay. All right. Before we move on to the basic syntax and semantics, let's see some demo. Okay. Okay, I'm going to cover a few use cases, 4 of them. It might take me a little bit time to go through them, but don't worry. The goal here is I'm just going to show you the capability of Python, and hopefully that makes you interested in Python, but you're not going to learn how to do these. So you don't have to follow me. And I'm not going to share all the instructions on how to get these to work. We'll go through the Jupyter Notebook. I can still share the code with you, but there's it's impossible for us to learn all of these in one lesson, okay? So it's mainly for demonstration purpose, and feel free to ask questions along the way. I would like to show you the Python's capability in building web application, and it's still related to machine learning. And its capability in visualization machine learning. We'll use Streamlit, which is one of the Python libraries to build a small chatbot, not really building a chatbot, but just like launching a chatbot really quickly. And then we'll be working with OpenAI API today to do some questions and answer, so that you, instead of going to, ChatGPT, you can actually just do everything using Python. And then you can start, considering building some small applications. Okay, it will be fun. Okay, let's talk about Python's ecosystem before we do that. Okay, what can Python do? When you learn Python, I think you need to understand that there's the core Python you need to know, right? The green box here, okay? And Python can be used for web development. It can be used for data processing, data science, machine learning, AI, cloud DevOps. It can be used, for automation, robotics. So I think you need to sort of have a little bit understanding of these, so that when you come across these in the future, you know that you're actually focusing on data and machine learning. So don't get distracted, because Python can be used for so many different purposes. And sometimes I realize that when you Google around, people will tell you to learn things, and then you're just like, getting distracted. If your goal is not to become a developer, then there are certain libraries that you don't need to worry about, at least at the beginning of your journey. Okay. So we need to focus on data and machine learning. I'll share the graph with you later, by the way, so you don't have to take a screenshot. So let's start from the Python core. Okay, this is some sort of guide on how to learn Python, and then I'll introduce you to web development and data as well. So if you look at Python core, okay, there are a few things you need to know. We'll start with the basic syntax, right? And you need to understand the data types, such as string, how to work with text, basically. There are 4 to 5 data types or data structures that you need to be very familiar with, right? So these are not the LeetCode type of data structure stuff. We're not talking about trees, we're talking about the built-in data types that are very essential to basic Python programming, okay? And most of the time, we're actually manipulating this kind of things, data types. And we'll do that in exercises today when we work with the ChatGPT API, okay? So you need to know string, list, tuple, set, and dictionary. You can use this as a reference later, okay? And after that, you need to understand the basic control flows, right? Because when we build web applications, build machine learning, a lot of times we're expressing some sort of logic, right? If we would like to do sentiment analysis, then maybe we're looking for some positive words and negative words, such positive words such as good, right? Excellent, awesome, and negative words such as, bad, right? Awful. So you're going to write the if-else logic, right? These are if-else statements, okay, that helps you control the flow of your, your program, Python program. And you'll write loops sometimes. Imagine you're doing some sort of web scraping. You would like to scrape all the jobs, data scientist jobs from Indeed or from LinkedIn, and they're going to iterate through the 5,000 jobs that are available out there, right? It's some sort of automation, but you have to create the looping, right? And there are different types of loops, such as recursive, and also while loops and for loops and things like that. We're not going to spend time today, but I just would like to let you know that these are some of the things you need to learn later. You can use that as a reference. Okay. After learning the basics, you need to understand the functions and modules. This is very important, right? Function sort of helps you modularize your code. A lot of times you'll realize you're doing something that's repeatedly, right? If you would like to plot a pie chart, and you notice that you do that very often, So you better turn that into a function. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Okay. But I'll explain that when we come across a function or module when we go through the examples today. You need to understand module, which is basically a saved Python script. Okay, just like a document, you save that in a script, in a file, and then you can execute that file to run your Python programs, your applications. And arg parse is something that's related to, like, just parsing the parameters from command line. But it is something you need to know. Okay. And then you need to move on to object-oriented programming. You don't need to be an expert in it, because class and objects, of course, is very important. It's probably more important when it comes to web development and software engineering. A lot of data scientists would prefer just to write functions. But you can of course go with the OOP approach, but understanding it is important, because when you work with deep learning, PyTorch, it has different types of APIs, and understanding objects and classes will be very important. Okay. When you work with any kind of programming, you're going to run into errors, right? There will be exceptions. When things go wrong, we need to know how to handle this kind of exceptions. And sometimes you want to capture the exceptions, right? So that's something you need to learn. And there's some other useful stuff you need to learn. Looks like this is not completed. I'll complete this later and share with everyone. Okay, so that's a lot of things you need to learn, but don't get overwhelmed. You can actually just learn this in a very short amount of time. And it's more important to do exercises, and the problem solving skill is what you need to learn, because it's impossible to sort of know everything about Python. There are a lot of things about Python that honestly I don't know about. But when I come across some problems, I'll be able to comfortably Google, or now I can use ChatGPT, but I'm going to find solutions, right? And I'm going to try things out, and I'll solve those challenges. Okay. All right. So that's the Python core. Now you're here for data fundamentals. So I'll help you understand, some of the things you need to learn on the data analytics and data science side. Okay. So Python's data capability. First of all, data manipulation, right? Pandas is something you need to absolutely master if you would like to work in, in data science. I plugged in some other libraries that are not as popular as pandas, such as, polars. It's written in Rust. Rust is a programming language that I firmly believe will take over the world in the next few years. And it supports, its performance is just so good. And people are building the data analytics and machine learning capability. But I don't think it's gonna beat Python anytime soon, because the community is actually more important sometimes. But Polars is really good if you would like to work in data engineering and data science. I think you need to pay attention to it. It's written in Rust, but it has a pandas-like API support for Python, and Modding is just another library that's kind of popular, and it has a lot of downloads on GitHub as well. Python is used for data visualization. Some of these boxes are basically packages or libraries that you can use to do visualization. Now, it seems like there's so many different things or tools you can work with to do the same thing in Python, and that's why sometimes people, beginners will get overwhelmed. So which one should I use? My recommendation is that, of course, you need to just get good at the basics, the matplotlib, or the pandas. Pandas has visualization capability as well. It actually depends on matplotlib. Lib here means just library, okay? It's a library of functions and modules that allow you to do visualization or plotting in Python. And it's very powerful, and it can do, even though the plots don't look very modern, it doesn't look fancy. So if you like the fancy version, then you can work with like Plotly, Panel. Seaborn is also very popular, right? So once you know how to work with one of these tools, it should be pretty straightforward for you to work with other tools. I think the learning curve is not that steep. It's usually learning the first library, right, in visualization or in machine learning. That's going to take a little bit longer. But once you understand how to work with one and you understand the basics of data visualization and analysis, working with the rest of them, it's just a matter of reading documentation or just Google or ChatGPT. There's really no need for you to memorize all of these. For example, I know Seaborn is really good. I could never memorize the syntax. So sometimes I just I just get the help, right, from Jupyter Notebook, or I just Google. I'll just Google how do you plot a multiple subgraphs or subdiagrams in one in one diagram or something like that, and I could never memorize them, and I always get confused, but Google always helps me. So, and ChatGPT might be able to help you become more efficient, because there's no point of memorizing these. You just need to Google, and right. But visualization is more about, do you know what type of plot you need to use, right, to answer certain business questions? Or why are you even doing a distribution plot? To understand the histogram, right? I think that's more important, right? The technical side, it's just practice makes perfect. After you become a data scientist, you're going to do this on a daily basis. And to be honest, most of the time you're going to have your own tools. You're just going to copy paste. So I think that's the part that ChatGPT is replacing. Like you never write things from scratch, because you have functions and the code that you have previously written, and you'll save them somewhere. And then it'll come back and reuse them. That's how it works, okay? So I'll show you some of these libraries, but this is not a course to cover all of these, okay? Python has database capability. It's usually not included in data science curriculums, but I highly recommend you at least give it a try. There are two popular libraries. One is called SQL Alchemy. The other one is CyclePG2. SQL Alchemy is, can be used, for example, with different kind of database engines, such as MySQL, right? SQLite. And CyclePG2, if you use Postgres, it works great. I know Amazon Redshift, but these are just database connectors, which means you can write SQL in Python, right? You can write the entire SQL scripts and save that as a string in Python and submit that from your Python script to the database. And it will execute the queries, the SQL queries in the database, and then get the results back into a Python environment. So you don't have to leave your Python environment. So you can do SQL in Python, or you can directly work with the SQL Alchemy Python API. It's a slightly different style, but it's just similar to SQL basically, because you're expressing things like, I would like to join two tables. I would like to aggregate based on some columns. I would like to do a window function. I would like to do shift and things like that, okay? And once you start to work in a production environment, you'll notice yourself working more, closely with this kind of libraries, okay? All right, Python can be used for data collection. So that's web scraping or data, collection from the web, right? There's some libraries, popular ones such as Beautiful Soup, can be used to parse, HTML files. It's very popular. You can use Beautiful Soup with request library, basically download a web page like the HTML or XML, right, file, and you use Beautiful Soup to parse the HTML page, which is semi-structured data, right? You can use Selenium for automation and Scrappy if you would like to do more large-scale scraping. Even if you work as a data scientist and they feel like, okay, web scraping sounds data engineering, it's not data sciencey, but it's very important for data scientists to understand how to collect data. And even ChatGPT has plugins now that allows it to do web scraping, but I don't think those are scalable solutions, and you have to pay for those, right? So you still need to understand how to do this. And it's important because when you do machine learning and data science, a lot of times the labels or the data you need for building the machine learning solution is not available, and you have to collect that from the web. And the best example right now, or the two examples, one is Google. Where does Google get all the data? Web scraping. But they do that at large scale. That's called web crawling, okay? ChatGPT does essentially the same thing, because all of the ChatGPT algorithms are trained on the data collected from web. And that's why Twitter now start to give you limit, right? They don't want you to scrape all of their data. And Reddit, they start to realize that they want to, go public. They would like to monetize, and they don't want to share the data, through free APIs anymore. They would like to charge for their APIs, right? Because people start to realize that data is the real competing advantage in the future as these machine learning models, start to sort of become open source, right? So what's the real difference is the data. So data collection is very important. And so that's why web scraping is something you should know if you would like to work as a data scientist or data engineer. And in the data ecosystem, Python can be used for big data. I sort of mentioned this already. So you can use Apache Spark and libraries such as Dask. These can be distributed to multiple servers that can be used to handle really large data set. On the data engineering side, Python can be used for building data pipelines as well. So there are libraries such as Apache Airflow, which has pretty huge community. But recently there are things like, Prefect, and Mage is really awesome as well. It's low code. There's also Daxters, but some of these are purely built in Python. For example, Airflow. Okay, so I hope I didn't overwhelm you. To get good at data or data engineering or data science, Python is really important. So the basic programming skills, right? Coming back to this slide, the basic skill is actually very important. So you need to be good at programming in general, right? And the rest of them are basically just a matter of working with different libraries, but still the Python programming part is very important. Okay. All right. So that's Python's capability in the data ecosystem. And then, and of course, Python can be used for machine learning and AI. I'm still building this. It's, sorry, it's kind of slow. Okay. So if you would like to do machine learning and AI, first of all, right, we talked about pandas. I sort of grouped pandas into the data category. So on the ML and AI side, you need to know mathematics. Right? So some of the libraries such as NumPy, SciPy, Stats Model, I mentioned them already, right? And then you move on to machine learning. So when you learn machine learning, there are a bunch of other libraries you need to learn. You don't need to sort of have fear, because once you know scikit-learn, it will be very easy for you to adopt other ones. Most of these libraries, or the future ones, they tend to follow the same pattern because they want their API to look very similar, right? The back-end technology can be different, the algorithm can be different, but they want APIs to be as familiar as possible to data scientists, because most of the data scientists, they sort of start their learning journey from pandas and and scikit-learn. So people are used to it, right? And that's why when Spark released the PySpark API, originally the programming style is different from pandas, right? They do RDD and stuff, and very soon they start to support data frames. And the reason why they support data frame is because all data scientists and data engineers understand how to work with data frame. So it's familiar to them, right? And now they even have pandas support. Like basically the API is almost identical to pandas now, right? So once you understand one of these, it will be fairly easy for you to adopt others. A lot of times I feel like it's just a matter of understanding what each library is capable of. So you need to understand the pros and cons. It's more about when you have a specific use case, you know what is the best library to work with, or the best two, and then you're going to try it out. And once you start to have more experience, then you just know right away which library you need to go with. Okay. So there are general frameworks, right, such as scikit-learn. When I call them general framework, it just means that you can pretty much do most of the things about machine learning in scikit-learn, because it supports data pre-processing, it supports pipelines, it supports a ton of machine learning algorithms, right? And Spark has its own machine learning ecosystem. But there are also some powerful algorithms. They are like a framework on its own, such as XGBoost, LightGBM. You'll come across these later when you start to learn machine learning. And there are also natural language processing libraries such as Spacey and NLTK. These are pretty well-known libraries. So sooner or later, you'll come across these. If you would like to process text data, then you'll definitely come across them, okay? When it comes to AI, it could be even more overwhelming. But the good thing is that when you start to move on to the AI part, you already are familiar with machine learning and the basic mathematics. So the API, like from a programming perspective, it's actually not hard at all. There's not much programming you need to do, to be honest. It's more about understanding the frameworks, for example, how PyTorch works in general. And when it comes to generative AI and things like, large language models and stuff, we don't train these models. GPT 3.5, GPT-4, which is not even, public, but there's open source versions such as Falcon. These models are pre-trained, right, by some organizations. They basically open source it or share with people, right? And we are really just using these models. So in exercise today, we'll basically be working with the GPT-3 algorithm, right, or the model that has been trained by OpenAI. And then it's really literally just 3 lines of code, and then we can do questions and answer, right? But of course, most of the companies will not find this satisfying solution because they don't want to upload the sensitive data directly to the Microsoft or OpenAI servers, right? So that's why they would like to sort of fine-tune open source large language models on their own server, basically, to be fine-tuned and trained on their own data set, right? But using the model, it's not a lot of coding. Okay, so the graph might look a little bit daunting, but once you understand the core of deep learning and machine learning, it's actually not that hard to work with. But of course, like I might be oversimplifying these. Okay, I won't go through all the details because there are things like MLOps and stuff. It's not completed yet. At this point, I don't think we need to explain all of them. All right. One last thing I would like to introduce before we do the demo is that Python can actually be used for building web applications. So sometimes you may come across, these terminologies. So I'll quickly introduce them, okay? Python can be used for building web applications. So there are general purpose web frameworks that you need to know. If you, for example, want to build a website, you would like to build some sort of chatbot and things like that from scratch, you can use Django, you can use Flask, Fast API. I won't go through the details, but in the future, these library names may pop up from time to time. Okay, when you start to move on to machine learning operations, then you'll definitely need to learn Flask or Fast API. But there are also ML or data applications, right? You can build everything from scratch, but that requires a lot of front-end knowledge and back-end knowledge. But there are also application building tools or frameworks such as Streamlit, okay? That's already available to you. So it simplifies things, even though working with Streamlit is still a lot of coding. So if you want to do visualization and build like enterprise-grade dashboard, you can consider Plotly Dash, for example. And Pano is pretty good too, right? But if you want to deploy machine learning models or build interesting machine learning applications, we can work with Streamlit, and Gradio is pretty good as well. All right, I think this is too much information dump. Let me actually just go through some real examples and help you understand how this works, okay? I have a folder. I'll share that with everyone later. So today's lecture material, like the notebooks, is actually in this zip file. You can find that on the learning portal. You can find that on Discord in the Python resource or Python material thread. But there are a couple of demos. The first one, maybe I'll introduce this Flask app first. Okay. So I'm gonna go to the command line. Okay. You don't have to follow me on this. There are things that you need to learn later, but I'm just going to show you the demo. Okay. This is Linux command line. It's the same as the folder structure here. I can use the Finder, but basically these are just folders and files, right? But I can do that through the Linux command line as well. So let me go to my downloads folder. I have a folder name called Data Fundamentals Python, and I have a subfolder called Demos. So if you go to if I go to download, I have a folder called Data Fundamentals Python and Demos, and I have a couple of folders, right? So in the terminal, it's the same thing, okay? I can display all the files, and you'll see that I have the openai folder, the ml folder, I have the zip file, okay? Just in case that this is the first time you're seeing a command line and you're not familiar with it. All right, I'm gonna navigate to the Flask TensorFlow app folder. Okay, there are actually a lot of files in it, and those ones ending with .js, that's JavaScript. Okay, .json, right, is usually used for configuration, but think of it as a text file. Okay, but you'll see the main.py, that's a Python script. So I think I'm not the one who wrote this, by the way. So it was a project I found on GitHub, right? I'll share a link with you. You can find it. I just cloned that application, right? Someone built, which is really cool. It's a machine learning applications, and it's trained on MNIST dataset. MNIST is one of the open source like dataset used for computer vision. So it's a library of 65,000 handwritten digits, so images, right? And they basically train a bunch of models on that, and it has the capability of doing handwritten digit recognition. So it's a bit dry. Let me launch this application so you actually see what I mean. Okay. So I'm going to launch this server, and don't worry about it. If you go down the path of machine learning operations or machine learning engineering, these are the things you need to learn, okay? Or web development. But for now, I'm using Anaconda distribution, and I'll teach you during the break on how to install the software, okay? Basically, I can have multiple Python environment set up on my computer. So in this case, I'm gonna run Python conda activate. I'm going to activate this virtual environment, okay? And then I'm going to run just demo. If you don't understand what I'm doing here, you don't have to worry about it, okay? All right, I'm gonna now go to browser. All right, so this is the web application. It's running on my local host, like my local computer, but you can run this in the AWS cloud as well. So the IP address is going to change to, the IP address of the server in the cloud. And it's running on computer port 8000, okay? Okay, on the left-hand side, we have something called a canvas, right? And it's using JavaScript, okay? So now I'm going to basically use my mouse to draw a number 2, okay? And the moment I release my mouse, it's going to convert that handwritten digit into an image. So it's captured as an image, and it's converted to Python NumPy array. So remember I showed you like a slide that tells you that Python can be used for data representation. So this is actually how Python recognizes this image, right? And that's why you see it's a little blurred, because it's using digits between 0 and 255. So you lose some it's not very clear, but it's good enough for the computers to recognize it. Okay, and here is the the computer vision model prediction outcome. I'm using a regression model and also something called CNN. It's convolutional neural network. And so it's basically using deep learning, but the model is pre-trained. So if you work as a data scientist, this model has been trained. So now you're going to load that into this web application. And when someone draws this image, or you can upload, right, a handwritten digit image, and it's going to basically do the classification and tell you, what digit this is. And it looks like the two machine learning algorithms, the regression model and the convolutional neural network model, sort of agreed on this. So they think it's 2, right? The numbers here are basically the probability. It basically means that, the convolutional neural network thinks that it's almost 100%, 96% confidence that it's 2. Regression model says it's 74%. This is a very simple model. So regression model is not really great for this type of tasks, and that's why the prediction can be off, right? But I can clear the canvas and just draw something else, right? Let's say, looks like they didn't do a good job in this case. It looks like 7, but it's actually 3, right? It's not always going to be accurate, but how about this? Okay, so it's not doing a good job. So as a data scientist, what should we do? Well, you have to go back and fine tune your machine learning models, right? So this model is trained on a very small data set. Looks like it's not really performing very well. But it's kind of, or I should say it's a little bit picky in terms of how we're going to write these, right? So it's probably, oh, sorry. Okay, so the whole point of this is really just a demo to help you understand that Python, in this case, is used for training the machine learning models to learn the representations, right? And once the model is trained, it can actually accept the data, which is the image, and then it converts that to some sort of NumPy array representation, and it generates the prediction. But if you want to build machine learning applications like this, right, you need to have some sort of interactions. Then you need to have a front end, right? You need to have like a web page where you can do interactions and stuff, and you need the backend server running the model prediction, right? So that's Python web application combined with machine learning. Okay, so that's what Python can do. All right, so this is the first demo. Let me give you a quick peek of the code. So there's a text file called requirements. Okay, this is really just a list of libraries that are used to train the machine learning models, or for example, Flask. It's a very early version because this project is really old. Okay, so it's still using Flask 0.12 version, but that's the web framework we mentioned earlier, right? And it's using TensorFlow 1, which is also a very old distribution. Okay, but we run this in a isolated Python environment, so it's still okay. Okay, so when Python will install all of these like software, right, or libraries, and then there's a README here, which is a markdown file, right? Sort of give you the instruction. Actually, I wrote this, but basically this is a step-by-step guide on how to create virtual environment and how to launch your applications. And typically you'll follow these, right? If you take a look at the main.py, it's a Python script. Okay. This is not my computer, and that's why I don't even have good text editor, but I'll open that in VS Code. Okay. And which is not set up yet. But this is a Python script. It's called modules as well, right? This is actually the main code for this application. So it's going to import some libraries, right? And it's going to restore the trained data. So if you don't understand this, that's totally okay. It's just a demo to help you understand like how things work or the capability of Python, okay? So the code or the model is actually pre-trained and saved in this regression.ckpt file, right? When we train large language models, the model is sort of saved, open source by Google, Facebook, and it's saved somewhere already. So we just need to read in those models, and then it will be able to do predictions. So in this case, we have two models, right? We have the regression model, we have the convolutional neural network model, okay? So when you run the Python script, it's going to read or restore these models. So it's loaded into memory, okay? And we have some functions that basically just load the model and generates the prediction. And it's this function here that generates the prediction, okay? And then we launched the web application, which is Flask, and it has, two endpoints. This is becoming a little bit technical, but just so you know that the input, this is the NumPy array representation, okay? It's 28 by 28, so in total, we have 784 pixels, right? That's what we see on that canvas, by the way. But this is basically how, this small applications work. And of course, the model training code is in Python as well. But you'll definitely need to learn more about Python, data science, and machine learning before you can fully understand how this works, okay? And this is just a quick demo. All right, let's move on to the next one. How about we do a Streamlit and chatbot example, okay? So there is a tutorial. I basically just adopted this directly from Streamlit documentation. I didn't write any of these code. It's just a demo, but I will share the link with you so you can go to this and find the openai Streamlit, example here. Okay, you just need to scroll to the bottom and find the code. But this is the ChatGPT clone, basically, right? If you're going to write this yourself, you can just use Python, you can use Flask, right, to do that. But there are always good libraries out there that sort of help you make your life easier, right? And Streamlit is one of those. It allows you to build data applications or machine learning applications without the deep knowledge of a web development or a software engineer. Okay, so that's why it's very popular among data scientists, because you can start to build interactive applications, and it's pretty cool. Let me show you how that works. In this case, I'm going to go to the Streamlit folder. Okay, I basically just copy that block of code and I save that in a script called app.py. Okay, and let me open that. Okay, so this is app.py using Streamlit and the openai API, and you can find the link here. Okay, I won't go through the code in detail, but I'll do the demo first. Okay, what we need to do is basically run Streamlit. Oh, I need to make sure that I'm actually in that folder. So I'm going to deactivate. All right, so let's go back and go into the Streamlit folder. I have this app.py, right? That's the same thing you see here in this folder. So I need to run this from the command line, Streamlit run app.py, okay? All right, it opens a tab in my browser. And it's running the application now. So now we have this, right? All right. So now we have actually, a prompt. So let's just type in some questions, and we'll take a look at the code. Okay. Is there any questions you guys would like to ask ChatGPT? I will be interested in asking, what is threads? which is something that's trending. Okay, so what happens right now is that we're doing the prompting. I'm asking a question, right? And then it sends an API call to OpenAI, right? So say this is the OpenAI API, and then this is our Streamlit application, right? Streamlit running on my laptop, okay? I just enter a prompt. What is a thread? Or I should say, what is threads? I was trying to ask OpenAPI, and then it sends back the response, right? So that basically means that I'm sending something called a request. In that request body, I will have the actual question, right? And then I get the answer or the response back, right? And the response is typically a JSON file, and it will find the answers here, okay? I'm not sure if you guys have signed up on, for threads, but basically it's Facebook, right? It's new service launched a couple of, is it 2 or 3 days ago? But now they have like 80 million users already. Now, apparently ChatGPT doesn't know what is threads. It's threads in computer science, right? This is the execution of threads, the smallest unit of execution within a program. That's the computer science definition. So that means, it's not really up to date in this case. But I think, in a few weeks, you should definitely be able to answer these questions. But yeah, you can ask any kind of questions and start just chatting with ChatGPT, right? That's another use case. What's good about Streamlit is that you don't now, all you care is running the machine learning part, right? And it can deploy the model, but the UI stuff, if you're not a front-end developer, but you can just leverage Streamlit, right? But I think if you want to build real applications, you still need to work with front-end engineers to build the best user experience. But if you would like to build a machine learning solution, you always need to give prompt and test results. It will be great if you have a prompt like this, so that you can even do internal testing, right? So this can still be very useful. But sky is the limit. In this case, it's really just a simple example that we got from their documentation, okay? If you take a look at the code, it's actually not that hard to read. So first of all, it imports the libraries from OpenAI and Streamlit, right? And the title is ChatGPT-like clone. That's what we see here, right? ChatGPT-like clone. Okay. We need to set the OpenAPI API key. That's actually what we're going to do in the lab today, in the exercise today, okay? But you need to go to OpenAPI, sign up for an API key, and you have to store it, right? And then it's going to check, do you have a large language model that's already being used? But in this case, it's saying that, okay, by default, right, we're going to use the GPT 3.5 turbo version of the model, okay? And initial messages, we're going to set that to be empty, basically, okay? And then there's the chat input. This part, where is where we input the chat, like the prompt or whatever questions, right? And then it's going to submit that to OpenAI by using this block of code. Okay. OpenAPI.chatCompletion.create. So this is the function that actually submits, right? So it loads the model and it submits your question. And then it's getting the response from OpenAI API, okay? So as you can see, this is actually, once you get comfortable with Python programming, this is actually not very hard, right? And also it's only like 40 lines of code, and it can start to integrate with ChatGPT, okay? All right, so this is the second demo. Anything else? OpenAI. Okay, so we're going to take a small break, and we'll come back and actually start to do, to go through Jupyter notebooks and learn the basics of Python programming. Right now, this is still just a demo, but let me finish the demo or we'll hit a break. Okay. I think I have the link here. Let me share this link with you. I think during the break, it will be great if you can sort of sign up for an OpenAI API. All you need is just use your Gmail or whatever email to create an OpenAI account. And then they have some examples. So for example, you can go to platform.openapi.com, create an account, right? You just need a personal account in this case. Let me log out. I'll re-log in. Okay. I will continue with Google signing. All right. So you need an API key because they will charge you, right? It has some free quota, but then you need to go to view API keys. Okay, go to the top right corner and click on personal. And then you go to API keys, and then you can just go ahead and create new secret keys. Okay, for example, test key and create the secret key. And you're going to copy this. You can only see the full key for the very first time. I'll share that with you, by the way, in case you don't have an account. Right? All right. And once I click done, I won't be able to see the key anymore, but it's still saved here. I can delete and create new ones. So you need one key. And then when you come back to the code, you basically need to know how to set it. Okay. So once we have an API key, I'm going to go to documentation, or let's go to examples, actually. So if you click examples, right, it has a lot of examples with some sample code as well. So for today's exercise, I selected the sentiment analysis. But let's start with the Q&A, right? So if you click on Q&A, which is the first one under examples, okay, it will tell you that, what is the model it's using. It's the Text DaVinci 03. This one is, I think, almost deprecated. So they have new ones, but it's still somehow used in the demo, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so there are some parameters basically to send to ChatGPT or OpenAI API. But at least you want to tell OpenAI which model to use for your specific prompting, right? And there's some examples of the prompt here, and it also has the API request example. So this is probably the simplest one you can do, but you can just copy this code and you can run that in Jupyter Notebook, and it's the same as just working with the ChatGPT, but you're doing that in Python instead. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, but you still need to understand the very basics of Python programming. So we'll do that after the break, and we'll open the Jupyter Notebook. We'll go through Python programming. In the end, we will have this small example of doing sentiment analysis using ChatGPT API, the OpenAI API, as well as some other Python libraries to do sentiment analysis. Okay, but this is not going to turn you into a data scientist, because this is not machine learning. We're really just using the models pre-trained by ChatGPT or whatever OpenAI. Okay. All right. I think it's time to take a break. We'll take a 10-minute break. So we'll come back and continue at 8:45. So basically in 12 minutes, we'll come back and do the exercise. Okay. So again, you will need to, during the break, if you have time, I think what you need to do is, have Python installed. I hope you guys have already, gone through the preparation material and have Python installed. But if you have not, you can install Anaconda Python. I'll share a link with you. You can go to this page, download Anaconda, okay? And it will automatically recognize your operating system, and you just click download. The file is probably 600 megabyte, and you install Anaconda, okay? I probably won't have time to teach you how to do software installation because we're going to run out of time. So you can go back to the prep material, or I'll tell you how to find that later after the lecture on Discord. But this is where you download it. I'll still go through the installation after the break, and then we'll start coding, okay? So I'll see you guys in 11 minutes. If you have any questions during the break, feel free to ask. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I see someone raising hand. There's an anonymous question. How do you calculate pixels? I think you're referring to the images, the handwritten digit. So I've worked with the data. So the, the data is basically by default 28 by 28 pixel. On the diagram, if it's showing 25, it's because it doesn't really show the last three, like, 26, 27, 28, sort of got rounded off, I guess. But in the data, it's actually 28 by 28. Yeah. You don't calculate that. You It depends on the image, right? So the image, when it's created, it already has the pixel information. Or when you read that into Python, you sort of will be able to tell how many pixels it has when you read that into NumPy. Yeah. Yeah, I will share the code on the learning portal, and the Jupyter notebooks have already been uploaded. But some of these demo code, I'll upload that to learning portal as well. If it's too late for you guys, in other time zones, you can watch the recording tomorrow morning. There's a question about how to use SQL in Python. Um, yeah, I can do some demonstration later, maybe in the last session, because you need to understand how to work with Pandas data frame. So yeah, I can do some demo, or we can do some small exercises at the end. Shaheen, you had some questions about the podcast. I'll have to find the name of the podcast. I'll share it with you later. It's a data engineering podcast, by the way. Well, we focus mostly on these pre-built models. Yes, for the exercise. This is not a machine learning course. We're not going to teach how to build machine learning models at all. This is a Python programming course. So we will just be using the pre-built models. Yeah. It will take you months to learn machine learning, so there's no way we can explain that in 4 classes. I think the models I sort of demoed is really just for demonstration purpose. It's not what we're going to teach in this course. Okay, we're about to get started. We have about an hour and 20 minutes left. So I don't think I'll have time to help everyone debug your Python installation. So if you do have, questions, you cannot run the notebooks, we'll leave that to the labs on Monday, or we'll help you on Discord. But I would like to get through this demo and help you understand the basics of Python. But if you already have Python running, that's great. You can definitely follow along. Okay. Okay. Well, let's get started. Um, we need to run Jupyter Notebook. That's the environment we're going to use to run Python notebooks. There are several different ways of using Python for data science. We can save everything as Python script, right? Like the one we're seeing here. I'm using VS Code because I don't have a text editor right now, but it's basically, app.py. So we can write a bunch of code. We save that in a Python script. But we always need to, it's not really interactive experience. For example, if you just want to run 3 to 4 lines of code, you can do that in VS Code now, by the way. But when you have a lot of lines of code, debugging from a data science perspective is not straightforward. So Jupyter Notebook is actually a more popular environment, right, where data scientists are actually going to do a lot of collaboration. They put their code into different cells, and then they can run each cell individually. So each block of code, you can basically, run them separately in an interactive fashion. But you need to have Jupyter Notebook installed. So you need to have Python installed, of course, and on top of it, you need to have Jupyter Notebook. So the easiest way is probably just have Miniconda installed, or Anaconda. Anaconda is one of the Python data science, whatever distribution. It comes with Python 3 installation, but it also provides most of the popular machine learning and pandas and data manipulation libraries, right? It comes with these already. So you download and install. Whether you're using Windows or Mac, you will see Anaconda Navigator. Okay, you'll see this this green icon, the circle, right? And you click on this to open Anaconda. It will be a little bit slow on my computer, so let's wait a little bit. This is a navigator. It just shows you the UI for you to choose which software to launch. It has multiple like data science software you can launch in. Okay. There's another way to run Jupyter notebooks once you have Jupyter notebook installed in your Python environment. So typically I prefer just to launch, Anaconda or Jupyter notebook from my command line. Okay. So if I type Python directly in my command line, but at this point I already have Python installed, right? So if I run which Python in my Mac environment, it will tell me that Python is installed under users, WeCloudData, Anaconda 3. So Anaconda 3 is the distribution that I use, and Python is, an executable under the bin folder. Okay, so when I run Python, it's basically going to run this Python command, and it's going to launch Python. So this is IPython. It's an this is just Python, but IPython is supported as well. But this is, an interactive coding environment, but it's not very user-friendly. For example, you can create a variable called A, and then you can print, right? Or you can just print hello world, okay? To quit the environment, you just type quit with the parentheses, with the brackets. But in this case, we're going to focus on using Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so I can actually just type Jupyter Notebook from my command line, and then it will run Jupyter Notebook in my browser. Okay, so let me hit run. It's a little bit too slow. All right, so it's loading Jupyter Lab, right? So these are just logs. You don't have to worry too much about it. But now it automatically opens the homepage of Jupyter Notebook on my computer. Okay, it's in the browser, and it's running Jupyter Notebook on port 8889. So that usually means that I already have a Jupyter Notebook session running, because by default it should be 8888. Okay. So this is a Jupyter Notebook environment. You're going to see the folders, and this is actually the folder where I have the demos, right? So it could be a little bit confusing at the beginning. Let me go back, for example, to my folder. So I have the demos, right? Under Data Fundamentals Python. Under demos, I have Flask, ML, OpenAI folders. I have the zip file. I have the IPython notebook, right? The file that ends with .ipynb. That's a Jupyter notebook file. This is where we write code and save that into the Python notebook file. Okay. Now, when you open the Jupyter notebook environment, you're going to see this in the browser as a new tab. It also lists all the folders and files in my demo folder. Now, right now, I don't see demo. Demo is more like the parent folder. So in my current folder, I still have, the Flask, right, app, ML. It's exactly the same folder, basically. I also have this lecture 1 Python zip file, right? That's because I launched my Jupyter notebook from this demo folder, okay? It's always using your current folder, right, to launch the Jupyter notebook server, and then we'll be able to see all the files in this folders by default, okay? Now, that's one way to open Jupyter Notebook. And as I said, probably if you are not familiar with command line, you can actually use the Anaconda Navigator. Once you install that on Windows, you can just go to software and then find Anaconda Navigator. On Mac, then just go to Launchpad and you will find Anaconda Navigator. Okay. So in the Navigator home, you will find things like Jupyter Notebook, There's Jupyter Lab as well, right? Jupyter Lab is more powerful, I would say. It has more, features. But Jupyter Notebook is, still very popular. Those two will look pretty much the same. So today I'm just going to teach using Jupyter Notebook because it's the most popular one. But as you can see, there are some other IDEs here as well. It has VS Code, right? So earlier I showed you like VS Code. It's for software developers and data engineers, for example. And Spider is another environment. It's not as popular as Jupyter Notebook, I would say. But looks like there are some other options like just IPython or IBM Watson Studio Cloud. Looks like they have some partnership with Anaconda. But yeah, so if you would like to launch Jupyter Notebook, you can just click the launch button here, and then it should open Jupyter Notebook in the browser. So it will do exactly the same thing, okay? But with the navigator, sometimes I think you need to figure out how to set the environment to make sure that you have the right environment set up. But this is not a, software installation tutorial. So just a quick intro. You can check out the installation videos to get it set up. For now, I'll just move on and run the Jupyter Notebook so we can do the lab. Okay. All right. So the notebook we're going to need is called Python Fundamental Lecture 1, Follow Along, .ipynb. If you see .ipynb, it basically means IPython notebook. It's basically Jupyter Notebook. And that means you can use, Jupyter Lab or Jupyter Notebook to open this file. Okay. There's also a solution, but try not to click on the solution. We'll do the, we'll do the coding from scratch. So I'm going to click on this IPynb file. It's going to pop up a new window. And this is going to be our starting point. Okay. I see some questions. I'll try to address that later. Okay. All right. So regarding this lab, the objective is to learn the basics of Python, the basic syntax. Let's try to understand the basic, string methods. String is a data type in Python. We're going to learn some of the methods. In terms of the Python data types, the entire lecture 2 will be dedicated to learning dictionaries and lists and tuples and strings, okay? But today it's mainly an introduction. So I would like to introduce the basics so you know at least how to navigate the Jupyter notebooks and run commands and things like that. And then we will complete a small sentiment analysis exercise using the API. So we'll be working with the Open API again, okay? OpenAI API. Some of the concepts introduced in this notebook, we're going to learn identifier, like the variables, keyword, object, methods associated with objects or instance. We'll learn built-in functions. Function is worth a separate lecture. But in order for this lab to run, I think you need to understand some of these, okay? And then we'll learn Python strings, as well as control flows, okay? Because when we do sentiment analysis, we'll have the if and else, logic, and then we'll move on to the exercise. You do need to install some libraries, such as OpenAI and Vader sentiment. So there are 2 different ways to install libraries. If you have the command line, you can open a new terminal, right? Assuming that you have Python installed already. Sorry, it's really slow. Let me close some of these. Okay. So for example, if you run which Python, it tells you where is your Python installed. If you don't have Python installed, it will give you the error. Right? And so this tells me that I'm using, Anaconda basically, right? And then I can use pip install OpenAI. What this means is that pip is a package management tool. It basically allows us to install libraries easily. If you would like to work with OpenAI, you just need to find the right package name. And in this case, it's just called OpenAI. So you just run pip install OpenAI, and that's it. And then go ahead, connect to the web, download the packages, right? And then it will install them. But in this case, if you see something like requirement already satisfied, it means I've already installed that because I did some preparation, right? So I have OpenAI library installed. Everything seems to be working. If you want to install some other libraries, such as pip install, let's say one of the machine learning libraries called XGBoost, you can do it this way, or you want to install scikit-learn, which is a machine learning library, you can just pip install scikit-learn. And I know the name because I've used that before, but looks like it's already installed. It probably comes with Anaconda distribution anyways. Okay. When we install these packages, where do they go? Okay. You'll notice that it's actually installed in a folder called site packages. Most of the time, I think you don't need to care about this, but if you do want to get good at, Python and stuff, I think it's useful to understand how packaging works, right? But in this case, we have the entire Python installed in Anaconda. So I'm just going to navigate to this folder. Let's go to user WeCloudData / Anaconda. On your computer, it might be like users and then your username and then wherever your Anaconda is installed. Okay. The ll command is really just listing the folder. On Windows, it's going to be a different command. Okay. But I'm not going to introduce Linux in this case. I just want to show you where to find these files. So let's say, users, data, Anaconda C. Okay, I'm in this folder, and there's a subfolder called site packages. Where is it? Okay, let me run that again. 1 second. Oh, it's probably under lib. Right, so it's under the lib, and then there's a folder called site packages. Oh, I think it's Python. Okay, so I can use pwd to show my current folder path. It's site packages. Don't worry about these commands. I just want to sort of help you understand when we install OpenAI, where is it actually installed? So Anaconda 3 here is the distribution. So this is where Python is installed. And then along with the Python, we also need the libraries that we install, right? In this case, it's installed under site packages. And you'll find a bunch of packages in OpenAI. I'm pretty sure it's installed here already. So let me just scroll up and find it. And you see OpenAI here, right? So when we install OpenAI, it will basically download everything into this folder. So let's see the OpenAI, and you'll see API resources, embedding utilities. You'll see some of these in the Jupyter notebook later as well. Okay, so the past 5 minutes, nothing to do with data science. I just want to help you understand. If you install, OpenAI, you can do that from the command line by running pip install, and then provide the library name. Okay, that's what we need to do. If you would like to install that inside the Jupyter notebook, what you need to do is basically run. You need to add exclamation point, but it's basically the same command, pip install OpenAI. And then it's going to basically run this as a command line. It's the equivalent of running pip install here. Okay, but you don't have to leave the Jupyter Notebook environment. So we can do it this way, but don't forget this exclamation point, which means like you're running command line. All right. So in this case, we need to install OpenAI and Vader Sentiment. I've already run that already, but I'm just going to run that again. So you know how to do that. And then I'll give you a quick introduction to Jupyter Notebook. Looks like I'm going to run over time today. All right. Ahmed said he's new to Python. Do we need to install a shell program to run multiple Python instances? No, in Anaconda, you can launch multiple Python instances as well. So you don't really have to only do that in the command line. But if you install shell, you can definitely do that as well. Okay. All right. So, you know, what I'm seeing here is basically requirement already satisfied because I have installed that already. Okay. So I'm going to delete them. Quick introduction to Jupyter Notebook. If you would like to start from scratch, what you can do is go to the top right, find new, and you can create a new notebook, and you can select the kernel. In this case, is basically Python 3. Okay, it's going to open up a blank Jupyter Notebook, and this is the environment where we're going to write Python code. Okay, and you can click the untitled, that's basically the file name next to the logo. And you can just say my first notebook, whatever name you would like to give it. Okay, and click on rename. And you can click on the disk icon here on the left side to save the notebook. Okay, so you can create a new notebook and start from scratch, or you go find that notebook. You have to download that from the learning portal, or you download that from Discord, right? And then you have this IPyMB file called Python Fundamental, and then just click on it. It will open this notebook as well. All right. So once we have the Jupyter Notebook open, I'd like to help you understand how to, you know, for example, start and stop a kernel, insert the cells and run the cells. Okay. So right now we're running the kernel. Everything seems to be okay. Okay. But sometimes the kernel will be dead. You know, it's just hanging there. So in that case, what you can do is just go to kernel, go to the kernel tab, and you can actually just restart the kernel. But restart the kernel means that you're going to restart a Python session. So whatever things you have run in the previous session will be wiped out. So you're starting everything from scratch, right? So you're doing everything from scratch, and like you have to run every single line of code from the top. You have to redo the whole thing. So let me restart the kernel. Now it says connected, and it started again. Okay. And then I can just start, you know, running it as a new notebook. And of course, you can interrupt it. Interrupt means that you're running some cells, or you're running a program, then you notice that it's taking forever. So maybe something is wrong, and you would like to stop that. You can just interrupt, right? Or you can shut down the entire notebook. Okay, and sometimes you'll lose the connection because it's probably, you know, a remote server, and then you can just reconnect. I think it's fairly straightforward. Once you start to use it, you'll get familiar with it. Okay, but how do we even start to input code, right? Because it looks like, you know, there are a bunch of things showing here, but I don't even find where to insert my code. So what you need to do in this case is go to the insert tab on the top. Okay, and then you can basically insert something called a cell. Okay, a cell is your edit environment, right? You can insert the cell above the current cell. So if I click on, you know, let's say this one, right? This is one big cell. You see that, you know, that blue line, the vertical line on the left-hand side. So when I select or click on this cell, it's going to highlight this cell, right? And then when I say insert, that means insert a new cell above this cell, right? Or if I go back and select navigating Jupyter Notebook and I insert a cell below, and it's going to insert a new cell below. Now, this is where we're going to do the coding. We'll write Python code here, okay? But it's better to sort of know the, the shortcut. The short key here is basically highlight a cell. Insert above is basically just hitting the key A. You just hit A, then it's going to insert a lot of cells. If you would like to delete this cell, just highlight it and you hit the delete key, or sorry, you hit the key D twice, and you have to hit that quickly. So DD, and it's going to just delete the cell. Okay. And of course, you can go to cell, and then you'll find like the delete to delete the cell. Okay. Hitting B means inserting below, right? So these are some of the useful hotkeys you can use. A and B are probably things you'll find using most often because you're always inserting new lines of code, right? All right. Now, what you're seeing here, there's some instructions, right? Just so you know that you can actually double click your mouse, right? Double click each cell. It actually shows you the code running behind the cell. So the code doesn't necessarily have to be Python code. It can actually be HTML. It can be Markdown. So in this case, I'm using Markdown, right? You'll see that the type is Markdown, but I can convert that to code. Okay. Now it's now if I convert that type, this cell type to code, it's sort of considered that as Python code. And if I click run, and it's going to give me error because this is really not Python code. This is, HTML tags, and this is Markdown. So you can't really run that as Python script. So I'm going to just go back and change it to Markdown. Okay. And then I hit run. It's actually going to execute this. And then it's going to render the results and display that. Okay. If you're not familiar with Markdown, you can, it's basically the README on GitHub, right? Those are all written in Markdown. Okay. I'll share some resources with you if you're not familiar with it. But with Markdown, I can, for example, insert my HTML tags. This is basically loading or downloading WeCloudData's logo, right? And the pound sign here is basically the headings and titles, okay? And the dash here will basically create the bullet points. Okay. All right. Another short key you need to know is how to execute some code, right? Let's say I double click on this cell, but now I would like to run it. You can click on the run button, but there's a short key, which is shift return or shift enter. For some computer will be shift return. For some computer will be shift enter. And that basically runs that cell and renders the results. So far we haven't run any line of Python code yet. I'm just introducing how to navigate Jupyter Notebook. Okay. All right. I think it's time to move on to actually start learning Python. So the first thing you need to know about Python is just how to create a variable or how to work with the identifiers. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to create a variable called data. Okay. I'm going to use the equal sign to do the assignment, which means I would like to create a variable called data and its value that the value I'm assigning to this data variable is 1, 2, 3, which is integer. It's a numeric value. Okay. So we'll start, let's say data equal 345, right? But you only have the code here. We haven't really executed that. I'm just going to click on run or click shift return, and then it's going to execute this. Okay. And then I insert a cell, and I can run print data. Print is a built-in function that allows you to basically, display or print out whatever value that's in a Python variable. And this is called an identifier. Okay, so print data is actually going to print out 345. And this little section here, that's the output area, and this is where your code is. Okay, so that's the really good thing about Jupyter Notebook, which is you can basically isolate your code and run the line by line, and every line of code you run, you will be able to see the intermediate output. This is really good for data science because, you know, data scientists need to do a lot of data visualization, exploration. They don't want to always run the full, like, you know, script. They just want to run part of it. That's what something that, you know, Jupyter Notebook is really good at. Okay. But the context of today's lab is actually just prompting and working with the ChatGPT API. So let's create a prompt. And the prompt is supposed to be text, right? Now in Python, this is called string. It's a data type, okay? We'll focus on data type in lecture 2, but the easiest way to create a variable, a string variable, is again, using the equal sign to do something called assignment. On the right-hand side is the value you would like to assign to the identifier or the variable on the left-hand side. So my question is, what is threads? It's something that Meta has created. So we're going to ask ChatGPT later, okay? So that's the prompt. After I run this, right, you have to run this cell again. And I can run that, you know, go back to this cell and run this multiple times. And you'll notice that on the left-hand side, this number will increment. It sort of keeps, you know, track of all the commands you have run. It keeps the history and it can roll back, okay? But in this case, we'll run this. Once you run that, the prompt now is a variable that has some sort of value associated with it, right? It's really just pointing to that object, which is saved in memory already, okay? And you can print that out. So we can print prompt, and that was basically print the value of prompt, which is what is threads in this case. Okay, we'll do this very often, so there's not much to talk about it. When we come back to this, if you have questions, let me know, okay? Because when you do this kind of, you know, assignment, you can create basically new objects, right? You can create different data types, like such as list, dictionaries. So we'll do that very often, okay? All right, that's the identifiers. I'm just going to pause and see if you have any questions. There are some questions regarding the environment we're going to use. So we will be using Jupyter Notebook as what I'm showing here. And the terminal I'm using is really just the environment for me to launch my Jupyter Notebook service. If it is confusing to you, you can always launch Jupyter Notebook from Anaconda. So just go to terminal, a launchpad, and find Anaconda Navigator, and you can launch Jupyter Notebook from there. Okay, these are just 2 different ways to launch Jupyter Notebook. But we will be mainly using Jupyter Notebook to learn Python in this course, okay? All right, well, let's move on. We will talk about keywords now. So the goal here is to understand that there are some reserved keywords in Python that you're not supposed to use as identifiers. So in the previous section, we basically learned how to create a new variable, right, and assign some value. But there's some, you know, so data in this case is the identifier, but there's some words that are reserved. You're not supposed to use it to create like a new variable, for example. So what we can do here is, well, we need to know what are some of the keywords used by Python and that we should avoid using as variable names. So I'm just going to import the keyword library in this case. And I'll explain how packaging and libraries work later. We'll import, you know, openai as well. But just for now, just try to understand that import keyword means that we're importing this keyword, you know, module. And in this case, so we can access some of the methods, okay? And once we import keywords or the keyword, right, this becomes a Python object. You can actually directly work with it. So you import keyword, you can actually just run keyword from the next cell and just click on run. And it's going to show you some basic information. It tells you that, well, this is a module called keyword, and you can find the actual module script in this folder. It's under Python 3.10 keyword.py. And that's how we import that. So basically, Python is considering that, okay, you're looking for a keyword.py module file, and then it's going to basically search in the Anaconda distribution folder, and it tries to find the keyword.py script. And then we're going to import all the functions and methods from this module, okay? But that's not the whole point of this, this exercise. We would like to basically print out or get a list of keywords that are used in Python and that we should avoid using as variable name, right? So you can just run keyword dot. That means we're calling a function or a method. And I'm going to hit the tab key to get a list of, attributes or methods that's available. But you know what? In this case, I'll just tell you the answer, because you're not supposed to memorize this, to be honest. This is probably the only time you need to run this command just for learning purpose, okay? But what this does is just print out a list of keyword, basically print out the keyword list, okay? So just keep in mind that these are the keywords that are reserved by Python, and you don't use that as a variable name. So I'll prove that, right? So let's say DEF, that's function definition. And there's class, right? If you don't understand how this works right now, don't worry, because you need to learn this when you go through Python training, okay? But let me give you an example, because what I'm trying to explain here is that, what if I would like to create a variable and I would like to assign it value 1, 2, 3, right? There's another example previously called data equal 1, 2, 3, right? And you see there are different color. Data is black color and the class is bolded and it's green color. So Python is already telling you that this is actually a keyword. So that's why the style is different. So data equal 1, 2, 3 is going to give me the value, and I can print out data, right? If you run class equal 1, 2, 3, now you're getting error. So the output area, okay. Sometimes you see these red words, and that means you're getting some error. And in this case, it's the syntax error. It's saying that your syntax is not correct because you cannot use a reserved keyword as a variable name. Okay, so you just need to memorize this part. When you run into this kind of error, that sort of just tells you that, well, something's wrong. And then if you look at this this variable name, it's green and it's bold font. That probably means you're using a keyword. Okay, you're going to come across this a couple of times, and then I think then you understand how to avoid it in the future. But this is really just a quick question, introduction to keywords. But we're not going to go through all of these keywords because you will not be able to memorize it. But once you start to learn, data types and stuff, you'll come across some of these. Okay. So no need to memorize them. It's just for you to understand that when you do work with identifiers or create variables, try not to use the reserved keywords. That's all it's about. Okay. All right. Now we're going to move on to objects. Sorry, just taking a look at the questions. There's a question about, for interview purpose, how much Python code need to be committed into memory? Do you mean how much command you need to memorize? Or by memory, do you mean the computer memory? I'm a little bit confused. Maybe you can ask the question again. Okay. All right, we'll move on to talk about objects, and we'll come back to some of the other questions. Objects. So everything in Python is considered as an object. It's pretty abstract, but let's try to understand what I mean by that. So previously we created something called data, right? That's a variable, right? Let's say data 1, 2, 3. Okay. There's a command, as you can see, this is called ID. This is the built-in function, but basically it returns the ID or the memory address of this variable. And this variable is basically a Python object. In Python, there are different types of object, right? There are data types, right? There are functions and class, okay? There are keywords, right? Built-in functions. All of these are objects. And objects usually point to, a memory location where data is actually stored. So in this case, if we run ID data, it's basically calling a function, and inside the brackets, the parenthesis, we provide the variable name, which is the data object, okay? And you run this cell, and you get a digit. Now, this is actually just the memory location of this object called data. So it actually means that data is referencing this value 1, 2, 3, and this is the address of that. Okay. Is this even useful? No, it's for illustration purpose, just to help you understand object. But in real life, you probably don't find yourself using the ID function very often. Okay. Now, below I have something, a line of comment here called use the type keyword to print the type of an object. I'm just going to follow this. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to insert a cell below, or I'm just going to hit B to insert a cell. So here we have a data object. So type is actually a built-in function. So it prints out the type of this object. Because in this case, I don't really know the type of this object data. I'm just going to run type, and it returns int. So int is short for integer. So basically, this is an integer. Okay, it's basically just numeric value, integer, but there's a floating point, right? If you have, let's say, data equal 123.5, and then you run type data, okay, and it's going to tell you that it's floating point number. And there are different types of data types, such as int, float, right? There will be string. That's something we're going to talk about in more detail next week on Wednesday. Okay. So we can use type, right, to tell the data, the type of an object. Okay. If you would like to get the memory location of this object, I think you know how to do that now, but basically just use ID data, right? Okay. All right. How about we import OpenAI? Now, in order for this line of code to run, you will need to have OpenAI installed. So what you need to do is run pip install OpenAI. Okay, you have to run this line first, or you can run that from the command line. I've demoed that before, right? Get OpenAI installed so that it can import OpenAI. Okay. Import means I would like to import the OpenAI module or package into my current Python session, right? So if this Python kernel has died, or I close my computer, I open that again, open Jupyter Notebook again, I have to import OpenAI again because it's not in memory. So import means bring that into the memory, right? So that I can start using it. Okay. All right. So I imported OpenAI. We just learned how to work with type, right? Let's get a type of this. It says it's a module, right? I would like to get the ID of this object. It's a module, and module is an object. So everything in Python is an object, and you can get the ID of this object. So it looks like this is the memory location of OpenAI, this object. Okay. What I'm going to do next is I want to assign a new value to this object called OpenAI. So I'm going to do OpenAI equal, let's say, awesome company. Okay. What I just did was assigning awesome company as a string, right? It's enclosed in the quotes. I use equal sign to assign that as a value to this OpenAI object. And this object, you can tell that the type is actually a string, right? So I did this. Well, previously we have an object, which is the library we import called OpenAI. And we know this is the memory address or the ID of this object, for example, right? But you can actually overwrite an object by just assigning another value to it. And let's get the type of OpenAI, and tells us that it's a string now. Previously, remember, the type was something else. Okay, it says module, right? It was a module, but now it is string. So it basically means that what this OpenAI is pointing to a string now. Okay, it's referencing another value instead of the module. Okay. All right, let's try to get ID of OpenAI again. Oh, sorry, OpenAI. Now let's compare this value to the previous one. Previously, it was the OpenAI library, right? It's a module and it ends with 9008. But now after I assign awesome company to OpenAI, it becomes a string and it's pointing to a different value, right? And the memory address is 8512. So that means these are two different objects, but this new one has overridden the previous one. That's the new object now, and it has a new location, okay? Now, what about we come back and import OpenAI again? Let's get the type of OpenAI. It's module again. Let's get the ID of OpenAI. It ends with 9008, which means that, well, this is basically the memory location of, the OpenAI package in memory, because we loaded that first time into memory, and that's the memory location. If you assign that a different value, let's just try that one more time. Let's say OpenAI equals cool. Let's get the ID of OpenAI. Now it ends with 2288, which is different from 9008 and 8512, because this identifier is pointing to a different object now, which has the memory location 2288. Okay. So what I'm trying to get across here is that when you assign value to some kind of object, right, identify, it creates an object. And depending on the value, right, that object is pointing to a different location in memory that has the actual object or data. And the same identifier can be used, can be reassigned a new value and just point to become a different object. And it's essentially just referencing something else, right? Okay. And it's going to overwrite the previous one. Just keep this in mind, because sometimes when data scientists work with model, they're going to create my model equal some sort of logistic regression model, and later on they will run that again in a different cell and say, okay, my model now is the XGBoost model. Okay. And then they would like to come back and reference the logistic regression, but it's actually already replaced by a different algorithm. So just keep that in mind. And that's why maybe you can name that differently. You can, and that allows us to tell the difference, because these are two different identifiers pointing to two different objects. So you're not going to get confused, right? So whenever you reuse an identifier, just be careful with that. Are you sure you would like to overwrite the previous one? Okay, so that's something you need to get used to when you start to program with Python. Okay, all right. So we covered identifiers, right? Creating variables, how to assign value. And we learned how object works, right? How to, now object has methods and it has attributes. Just like, for example, we have a car, Tesla car. The Tesla model, think of it as a class, right? And you can create, 1 million, Tesla car, right, with the same version. But each one of those cars now become a separate object, right? But these objects, they're all Tesla cars, right? Right. So they share similar attributes, right? And they have same methods. For example, Tesla car, if there's a car object, it's supposed to do something, right? The car will, it has a brake, right? It can accelerate, right? Okay. It will beep, right? Even though with different sounds, okay? And these are all the same. These are all the methods shared among these objects, right? But these objects, like different Tesla cars, even though they share the same methods, right? They can run the same functions, but they may have different attributes. So for example, like one Tesla car is white color. The other one is, the black color, right? The interior might be different. It can choose different patterns, right? And those are the attributes that are different, okay? But they're all referencing the same class, which is Tesla Model 3, for example, okay? So we'll learn more about this when we start to learn things about class and functions and modules. But today, I just want you to know that once we have an object, it has methods, so it can do something, right? That's the whole point here, because, for example, we have an OpenAI object. We would like to have a Q&A session. We would like to submit a prompt and would like to get answer, right? So these are the methods we're going to call, okay, to make it work. So let's move on to methods. So we know objects have methods and attributes, right? So for example, we would like to use the OpenAI completion. So OpenAI is like a package, but at a high level, you can think of it as a module as well. And there's a module called completion, and there's a function under this module called .create. I'll spend a little bit more time in the next few sessions to explain how these works. But today, you just need to know that we are working with the OpenAI package, right? And it has something called create completion, okay, or a method called .create. And we're going to use this .create method to create a response based on the question. And it takes two parameters. One is we need to provide the model. We need to tell OpenAI which model we would like to use. It could be the GPT 3.5, but in this case, the default is Text DaVinci 003. That's just a model, pre-trained model we would like to use, right? And then we need to provide the prompt. What question do you would like to ask? So these are the things that we can change, right? All right, so let's learn to work with the methods. So the first one is import OpenAI. Of course, we need to import this library, but we actually have done that in the previous step, but you can always just import that multiple times, okay? And importing that multiple times is not going to create new objects every time, because OpenAI has been loaded into memory already, and it's always going to just rerun that to reference to the OpenAI, in memory. Okay, so it's not gonna, the ID will basically stay the same every single time. Okay, all right. If we would like to know, but imagine you're starting something new and you have no idea how OpenAI API works, right? So you want to know that, okay, this is an object has some sort of attributes and method, but what are the available attributes and methods? So there's one built-in Python function that you can work with, which is called dir. Okay, in Windows, dir is basically just listing the folders. Now, in this case, dir is just listing the methods and attributes in OpenAI with this OpenAI object. So you can use dir to list all of them, and you'll see things like this is a list of methods and attributes, right? You'll see API error, audio, right? You'll see embeddings and edit. And of course, you have to read the documentation to know actually how to work with these methods, okay? There are attributes such as version of the OpenAI API, right? There are some other things, but these are attributes and methods. Okay, so you can use dir command to print out that. okay? Or you can use the vars command to do that as well, but I'll skip some of these details today, okay? Let's try to work with one of these attributes, because as I said, objects will have attributes and it has method. So there's one attribute called dot version, okay? And it's case sensitive. So let's get the type, and it's telling you that it's a string, okay? So if you actually run openai dot version, right? This is an object called openai. But by the time we create this object in memory in Python, in that Python session, this attribute has already been loaded. So we know that it's a string, and this is the version of the openai. It should be the latest one because I installed today, okay? But we would like to do the Q&A. We would like to ask OpenAI questions, right? So in this case, we need to work with the completion module. Okay, so what we're going to do is run OpenAI. So when we run dir, we will be able to find that completion module. Okay, so let's run OpenAI dot completion. It's case sensitive, so the C is capitalized. Okay, let's run this. But looks like it only prints out some basic information, and it tells you that, okay, you can find this in openai.api resources, completion. Okay. If you like to get more help, you can use the docstring. So you can basically run help. The color is green, so that means it's built-in function, okay, in Python. So that basically means just give me some help. It's going to print the documentation, openai.completion, and you're going to get more details, right? Don't worry about it. At this point, we don't need to understand what these means. Okay, it's really just the introduction session. But essentially, it means that, well, this is the help on this class completion in this module. So the module is completion, right? And in this module, there's a class called completion. Okay, so it gives you the details about this class, and it has some sort of method, okay? Class methods defined here, and you'll see asynchronous create. There should be a create somewhere as well. It's a little bit hard to read, but there are also the public documentation that it can access from OpenAI's website as well. It's the API documentation, but this is just for you to get the help in the Jupyter Notebook environment, okay? So this is really the first class on Python. So the goal is not to understand how exactly these work. So I'm just telling you how to get help. Okay. All right. So what are we going to do next? We're going to use, we know that openai.completion has a create method in this class. Okay. So we actually want to work with the .create method, okay, to create, to submit a question and get the response back, right? So I'm going to get help on this method. Okay, so basically we have an OpenAI completion, right, object, and it has a completion class, and we would like to use a function called create a question and then get the response, right? But we need to know how this works. Now, again, this is really just learning how to work with an API from the ground up. You can read API documentation, or you can sort of just do this kind of help, right, in the Jupyter Notebook. But in practice, I think you're supposed to sort of get familiar with the API, read some documentation, and you know how to do implementation right away, right? So this is only the first time you're working with a new library. You probably do some exploration like this, okay? Unfortunately, the docstring is not detailed. It's probably that they just don't have the time to implement all of these in detail, but they do give a link. Let's click on the link to actually go to the API reference, okay? That takes us to OpenAI platform, the documentation, okay? And it gives you more details. It says, well, you're making a request to the API, right? And looks like there are two parameters that are required, so mandatory. So you need to provide the model and also the prompt. Okay. And there's some other details. I'm just going to skip them. Okay, in this case, we'll just provide the model and prompt, and let's give it a try. So what we're going to do is we will run openai.completion.create, right? And I'm going to use the parenthesis and then provide the parameters. Okay, so we would like to create an API call, and then at least we need to provide the questions. We need to provide the models we would like to use, right? So here, there's some basic information in instruction here. So we would like to work with, this model, which is the default DaVinci model, pre-trained, and then we would like to give it a prompt. So what we need to do is come back here. I'm just going to paste that here, but we need to sort of change this to, we have to use the equal sign, okay? Dot create. Oh, missing a comma here. So you can write it in this style as well. You don't have to use a new line, but basically this create, okay, method, right, is taking two parameters, model and prompt. Okay, so we'll come back here, provide the model. You actually need to do the research and understand which model you would like to use, right? And then the prompt. Now the prompt is something we can customize, right? So in this case, I'll just say, tell me something about NFL. And it's actually sending an API request to OpenAI, and we get the response back. Now, we have not learned data type yet, right? So we don't know how to parse the response. We'll leave that to the next class. But it can already see that in the response, looks like they tell us that, well, you're using this text completion object, right? That's the method we used. And this is the model you used. The choices are basically a list of responses, but looks like here we only have one choice, which is basically the answer. It says NFL is the highest level of professional football. Well, looks like it did a bad job at prompting in this case, because the answer is pretty brief, right? And this is the usage telling you that how many prompt tokens I have used, because they're going to charge us, right? So that's how we work with, an API, or in this case, we have an object called openai, and we would like to use a method called .create to actually do something. And in this case, it's actually using the test completion API to provide the answer. And what we provide is the prompt and the model we use. Okay. So that's how we work with objects. Okay. All right. Let me see if there are any questions before we move on. There was a question about when we use the dir command to list attributes, we see some properties that starts with underscore. It's actually double underscore in this case. So those are considered as special attributes or special objects. Yeah, special methods. Some of those are attributes, some of those are methods. Those are the special ones. When you learn object-oriented programming and modules and stuff, you'll come across some of these. Sometimes the variable name starts with underscore. Sometimes it starts with like double underscore, and sometimes it has the leading and ending double scores. And then they all have different meanings, okay? All right, just a quick recap. We learned how to create, a variable and assign value, right? And then we learned that these variables are actually just objects, and we know that they're stored in the memory, right? And we know objects also has methods. So we can use, whenever we create an object, we can do something about it, right? The methods, you can think of them as functions as well, but they're methods or functions that are associated with objects. But in Python, there are also like, general purpose functions or built-in functions that are not tied to any specific objects. So for example, print, right? You can just print hello world. That is actually a function. And the color is, of this word or this keyword is green. That means it's the built-in functions, right? So it's, it's going to print out the results, right? You can use dir again, if you would like to get a list of built-in functions, you can use the dir to get those attributes. And it's basically going to print out all the built-in functions. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the built-in functions. Okay. And this is where we find things like dir, which is a built-in function on its own, right? We will have things like open, that opens a file, right? Remember, we got help on something. Help is a built-in function as well. And there's also input. So looks like what we're doing here today is more like everything is related to prompting and, asking questions. So let's work with input. Okay. So input is a function and you can see it's green color. If it's not the keyword, then let's say inputs, then the color is black, right? So that is not a special keyword. So in this case, input, that means we're running a function. When you call a function, you always need to use the parentheses because you need to pass some sort of parameters and arguments to the function and tell the function what you want to do, give some instructions. And in this case, the input here is really just the prompt, right? Let's say, what is a thread? What is threads, right? Okay. Even though it's in plural format, but it's really just Meta's new service, right? So that's why I use what is. But let's run this out. And when you run this, it's actually waiting. The prompt is waiting for your input. There's a box here where you can actually type something, right? And you see the asterisk here. Whenever you see this, that means your program has not completed yet. It's still running. So let me put in what is threads. Basically, it's Meta's new Twitter clone, right? I hit enter. Now it's done. So it's printing out what I just answered, right? This is the basic form of prompting, basically, but it's just like asking questions and we have to answer the question ourselves instead of asking ChatGPT, right? Okay, so that's the built-in functions. And in case you see, the word that's, in green color, that means it's a built-in function or attributes. Okay. All right. We're mainly manipulating text today. So there's one data type we need to learn, which is string. Okay. So what we need to do is create a string called tweet. Now, we learned that in the first section, which is how do we create an identifier? So in this case, tweet equal. So I basically found this tweet online on twitter.com. So when you work with a string, it needs to be enclosed in quotes, right? And then this is the body of the tweet, okay? It's Friday morning and Threads has 70 million users, verified real users, more than the population of all of California and New York combined. Would be surprised if Twitter is dead, done, over. Well, that's what this tweet is about. Okay. Well, we would like to. The instruction here says that we need to print this tweet. So let's just print the tweet, right? Oh, I need to run this. Yeah. So we print that out. That's super easy. We would like to check the data type. And it tells you that it's str. That's basically string data type. It's basically the text data type. Okay. And we would like to work with another commonly used built-in function, which is called len. That's getting the length of an object. In this case, tweet is a string, and length is basically calculating how many letters it has in this text. And it has 271 letters. Okay. So these are some of the basic functions, you can use to built-in function you can use to work with a string. But as I said, when we create this tweet, we basically create an object. An object has method, right? So you need to understand like how to work with some of the string methods. Okay. What we would like to achieve here is we would like to count the word occurrence of the word dead. And then we would like to turn all the letters into uppercase. And we would like to do some kind of string substitution. Okay. I think it mentioned like 70 million. So maybe tomorrow it's 80 million. So let's change, 70 to 7 to 8, basically. Now we have this tweet object, right? When you work with an object, it's always important to know the type of the object. If you don't even know the type, you don't know what methods you're supposed to use. So in this case, it's string. Once you get familiar with the string type, then you don't have to get help. But this is the first time. What are we going to do is we need to get help. Or what are some of the methods or attributes? Well, just dir. Right? There's some special ones which you don't have to care about. But looks like these are the methods associated, like these are basically string methods you can use, right? And you can capitalize the first letter, okay? You can count, maybe this is probably counting like substrings, right? And you can find, this is like kind of similar to regular expression. You can find a substring, you can do index. Some of these functions are similar to the function we're going to use like in Excel, right? You can check if it's digit, okay? You can do joins. There are a bunch of things we can do. So when you're trying to get familiar with like, an object or, a library, you can try these, right? But the best way to learn is probably when you have a use case and you just try to figure out how to use it, or just Google, okay? Because there's no need for you to sort of go through every single one of these methods and learn, because you're not going to memorize them. Okay, so it's important for you to understand, okay, these, just print out all the methods and find the ones that you think will potentially be helpful and give it a try. But let's say in this case, we would like to do a count. The question here is count the word occurrence of dead, right? Let me delete this. Let's say, so let's just work with tweet. It's an object, which is string. And then I'm going to hit dot, because dot is how we call a method or function. Okay. There's a tip I would like to give you. In Jupyter Notebook, when you hit dot, it has some sort of auto completion capability. So if you hit the tab key, it's actually just going to show you all the methods or attributes that's available. In this case, it's mostly the methods, right? So it means one way to understand, like, what are some of the available methods, just hit tab, okay? And then you just choose the one. Let's say, looks like this is the one I need, but I'm not 100% sure, right? So you try tweet.count, you hit enter. It doesn't give you any useful information. It says this is a function, right? Well, one thing you need to memorize is that when you work with a function, you actually need to call the brackets, right? You need to use the parentheses, okay? But if I run this, it's going to give me type error. So that means we still haven't figured out how to work with this, right? Another tip I would like to give you is that you run tweet.count, right? This is a function, but you would like to get docstring. So docstring is basically the documentation. There are two ways, okay? Do help, and that actually prints out the docstring, okay? Another way to do this is just tweet.count, and you hit shift and tab, Shift plus tab. But your mouse, your cursor needs to be next to count, or at least it's, here, and then you just hit Shift tab. It's going to pop up the doc string, which is exactly the same. Okay, but what's good about this is it's convenient. And then when the doc string is really long, you can hit this plus sign and it's going to print them out, right? So you don't have to keep scrolling. Okay. But taking a look at this count and return the number of non-overlapping occurrences of substring called sub. So basically it means that to work with this function or method, you need a string. We run string dot count, and inside the brackets, you need to provide the substring. Okay. And you can provide the start and end, but in this case, the question is, we're going to count the word dead. How many times? Okay. And you run this one time. Okay. If you change this to A, you're just looking for a substring, which is just one letter A. It occurred 16 times. Okay. So this is how you go about working with a new object, a new data type that you're not familiar with. So you're going to run the dot, right, to do auto completion to understand, or you can use dir to understand, oh, these are the methods I can potentially use. And then you go to each method and you get the doc string by using Shift tab, or you can just use the help, or you can read the documentation on GitHub or on the website. But that's how you learn, right? Once you get the doc string, then you have to look at the description of, like, for example, what are some of the parameters that's available or I need to use, right? In this case, it's the sub here, basically the substring. That means you need to provide a substring. What are you looking for? What are you counting, right? In this case will be, let's say the word dead, okay? Because the person is saying that Twitter is basically dead, right? I kind of disagree, but anyways, so that's how we work with some of the string methods. We'll just try two more, okay? The first one is, how do we turn all the letters into uppercase? Then I'll just give you the answer. Basically, tweet, right? Dot upper. And keep in mind that this is a function or a method we're calling. So you need to use the bracket. If you run tweet dot upper, it only gives you the basic information about the function. But this is actually running, right? And you can do the substitution as well. In interest time, I'll just skip that part. Okay. All right. So that's how we work with object and how to work with string. Now, okay, there's something else I need to introduce, but I'll go through this quickly. So with string, we can actually work with operators. So you can actually use the plus sign, and you can use the multiplier, but the subtraction doesn't really work here. I'm just showing you one example, because we're gradually forming the prompt we would like to ask ChatGPT, which is the last part. Okay, let's say we have the prompt question, and there's also the actual question, right? So the question here is we create a string variable called prompt question. So my question is, can you tell me the sentiment of this tweet? Please answer positive, neutral, negative. So I'm sort of doing the prompt to set the expectation and tell ChatGPT that I need the sentiment of the tweet, and you need to tell me positive, neutral, negative, but we also need to tell ChatGPT the actual tweet, right? So that should be on the next line. So you can create them in two different objects or two different strings, and you can concatenate them. So basically what we can do is we run prompt question plus prompt tweet. Okay, it actually works on string. Okay, so it's basically going to concatenate them, and you'll see, can you tell me about this? And then negative, positive, neutral, and then it appends the second string, right? But that's not what we want in this case, because we want to have a new line. So we probably want them to be in separate, two separate lines. So it's easier for ChatGPT to understand. So what we can do is we can add a new line. This is called escape. Whenever you see the backslash, that means it's escaping. So escape character here is, you sort of have to memorize that. There are not a lot of them. \T is tab, right? \N is basically a new line. It's better to see how that works. So I'm concatenating 3 strings. The \N is a string as well, but it's a special, so it's a special string that does the escape, which means it's actually not going to print out the letter N. It's going to consider \N. Whenever it sees backslash, it knows, okay, now escaping this, and \N, now it means that it needs to create a new line. Okay. So I had a typo here, but this is what we get. So we have inserted a \N, right? Now, if we print that, they are actually separated in 2 different lines. So when you use Python print, it's not going to show you the escape anymore, but it's essentially just a new line. Okay. So that's the string we're going to send to ChatGPT, and hopefully we'll get some sort of sentiment results back. Okay. So we talked about the plus, but if you would like to try, if let's say prompt question, I would like to subtract, let's say negative, it's actually not going to work. Okay, so this operator, subtraction, is not supported. So it will tell you unsupported operand type for string. Okay, but you can use the multiplier. So what we can do is, let's say we take this object times 3. Okay, it actually just concatenates them, like it creates 3 copies of it, but it puts it in one big string. Okay. All right. Some of the operators related to strings, and I think we introduced escape character already. So \N is a new line, and \T is basically a tab. So we can give it a quick try. Let's say plus \2 plus T. I can add multiple of these, right? And let's print them out. Okay, and you see these are basically 3 tabs. Okay. All right. Now, lastly, before the final exercise, the exercise will be really quick. Okay. Sorry for going over time a bit. So I think we'll need 15 more minutes. Let's talk about the control flow. So here, to do sentiment analysis, right? We have different scenarios, right? So we'll start with the simplest sentiment analysis method, which is just counting the words. Traditionally, the way people do sentiment analysis is basically, you have a list of positive words and you have a list of negative words, right? The positive words are things like excellent, good, great. The negative words will be, bad, sucks, right? And then you just count like the number of positive words you have in that text compared to the number of negative words, right? And then you can have the if-else logic to decide whether it's positive or negative based on the count. Okay, so let's give it a try, and then we'll go to resort to more sophisticated methods, right? So first of all, in this case, I would like to look for the positive words, and I'll say, let's say we focus on good. Okay, so good is a string, right? Let's first try to understand the booleans. Okay, in Python. So the strings are case sensitive. So we can check if good with the lowercase equal. So when we have one equal sign, that basically does the assign value to some variable. But when you have 2, it's actually doing a comparison. It compares like if they're actually the same string. Okay. Apparently they're not the same. So it's going to return true or false. In this case, it's false, right? But if you change this to lowercase, then it's going to return true. Okay. And you can check, for example, there's a built-in method called function called isInstance. And you can check if good is an instance of string. Oh, typo, is instance. Oh, sorry, is instance, right? So it's basically telling you that, well, this is actually a string, right? In data science, sometimes it's useful. You want to check if the data type of certain column is, string or, floating point value. You may want to use this, okay? But these are the operators that will actually return a Boolean value, which is either true or false, right? And you can also check the, if some substring, let's say good in, let's say, prompt, wait, what's the name of the variable? Let's say prompt tweet. Right? And it says true. So prompt tweet is, I'm really good at prompting, let's say. So you want to check if good is as a substring, right, can exist in the prompt tweet. So it's going to return true, right? Now, if I work with prompt tweet as a string and I work with this replace, which is substitution method, I can replace good with bad. Okay, so now the tweet actually becomes, I'm really bad at prompting. Okay, and then if you check, let's say prompt tweet equal, in this case, this returns the new string, and you have to assign that to prompt tweet. So that overwrites the existing variable, or I can just create a new one. Okay, let's say prompt tweet bad. Okay, and then when you print this out, that's the one that has the string substring replaced, right? And I can check good in prompt tweet underscore bad, then it's going to return false. Okay, so this is the booleans, and now we can actually use the if else statement to sort of create our sentiment analysis. So I will say if good in prompt tweet. Okay. This is how blocking works in Python. It's actually, when you have a colon, it sort of identifies a block of code. So the next line, which is indented, it's using four spaces as indentation. So if I hit enter, you see it doesn't start from the very beginning, right? But let me complete this first. So if good in prompt tweet, I would like to print positive, right? I hit enter again. I go back to the beginning and say else, which means if good does not exist in prompt tweet string, I'm going to print negative. Okay. And then I run this block of code. So the way it works is that it's going to run the if logic first, and it check if good is in prompt tweet. And we know that it's going to return true, right? Because you can run that separately. Good in prompt tweet, it returns true, which means it's going to run if true, then it's going to run this. Otherwise, it's going to print negative, right? This is considered as a block of code, okay? And if you have new lines of, you can have multiple lines of code running here, right? Okay. And it's going to print that twice, right? So it's using the indentation, which is not a tab. It's actually four spaces. That's just how this works in Python. But, you can do the indentation that runs the block of code, okay? And then it moves on to the next block. If else is at the beginning, then it knows that, okay, this is where this is going to end. And then after that, it's going to move on to the else. But depending on, right, whether this returns true or false, it only goes to else when good in prompt tweet returns, false. So if we try bad, it's going to probably print negative, and we're right? So in this case, it means if bad in prompt tweet, it returns false, then it's going to directly go to else, okay, block. It is not going to run the print positive anymore. So that's how the if else control logic works. The control logics, Python has different control logics. There are loops as well. So we'll cover that later, okay? But today, everything we've done so far up to this point is just to set up the tweet and prompt so that we can actually call the API to get the sentiment back from ChatGPT, okay? All right. We're finally at the end. So there are two different ways to do sentiment analysis. We did it sort of manually, right? By just looking at some positive and negative words. But human language is very complex. Sometimes when people mention some negative words, but it's actually sarcastic, right? Or maybe you have like not in front of the bad, right? It's not bad. So if we do this in a very naive way, then it's not going to be a good model, right? So in this, well, it's not even a model. It's basically some sort of rules, right? So we can actually use machine learning to do this. In the actual machine learning course, like if you learn machine learning as a data scientist, you need to know how to use data to train machine learning models, right? So you can build your own sentiment classifiers. But since we're not there yet, we'll just leverage existing libraries. And before large language models and openai, models, typically people will download some sort of pre-trained models to their laptop and directly run the classification. So Veda is just one of those libraries, but I can tell you that don't rely on this. It's not super good, right? Because it's a very hard problem to work with. Okay, but then we have openai that does pretty good. So maybe in the interest of time, we'll start with openai maybe. So first thing we need to do is we need to import, of course, import openai, and we have this module loaded. The OS module is just operating system. It means operating system, and it allows you to get some sort of like environment variables. So in this case, you need to go to OpenAI and get the API keys, right? And you have to save it. Let me create a new one. Let's say new test key. Okay, I'll copy this and come back here. We need to set the API key because whenever we talk to OpenAI, it actually requires the API key. So OpenAI sort of first, they know that it's you that's making this API call. And then they also want to know that sort of keep track of the API calls because they will charge you. So if you make a lot of aggressive, API calls, they may want to limit your API calls, right? Or they want to charge you more, basically. So that's why you need to set the API key, okay? You can replace this part just with the string. Oh, sorry. I thought I copied that. Okay, I'll just paste here. That's one way to do it. You hard code it, but it's not suggested because now everybody can see my keys, right? It's for testing purpose, that's fine. In practice, people will save that as environment variables. So you set an environment variable called openai underscore API key, and then you use the operating system module that has a function or a method called get environment variable, and then you provide this environment variable name, and then it's going to actually retrieve the key. Okay, so I'm just going to run this. Okay, and it sets the API key, right? And that's the API key. okay, that I'm using, but you can directly just, put in the key as well. So that's what you can do, okay? All right, so you need to get the key set up. Now I have the keys. I would like to write my prompt. I think we already have that. So my prompt is, I'd like you to analyze the sentiment of this tweet. Can you tell me whether it's negative, positive, or neutral? Right. I use \n, okay, to create a new line. And this is the tweet. That's the tweet we created previously, right? It's Friday morning. Threads has 70 million users. But for this to work, we basically need to submit the prompt as a string to openAPI. But this is the prompting stuff. You need to sort of instruct ChatGPT or OpenAI how you would like them to answer a question, right? You need to tell them the question, but you also need to give them the prompt. That's how it works. You need to put them in one string, okay? So I'm going to call that my prompt, and this is what it looks like right now, okay? And the next step is basically calling the completion API again, right? OpenAI.text completion, and it has a method called create. Right? Using this function, we provide the model. Okay, you can change this to ChatGPT, GPT-3.5. So you can change the models as well. Okay, provide the prompt. So here we created an object or a string called my prompt, my_prompt. Now, in the create function, it takes a bunch of variables. Let me see if we can still find it. Yeah, so here, right? So these are the parameters, model, prompt. These two are mandatory, but there's also things like, max tokens and temperature and stuff like that. So I have them here, but this is just the default value. Okay, I just copy paste that from the examples. Okay, the only thing I changed here is the prompt is different, right? The question I ask is different. So let's run this. And this time it assigns the value or the response, like the output of this API call assigns that to a response variable. Okay, so we're anxiously, trying to learn the results. Let's just print response. Again, that's the OpenAI object, text completion. It had every prompt you do, it has a unique ID, so they can keep track of that. Okay, and here are the choices. This looks like there's only one. This tweet is negative. We know it's probably negative, right? It says that Twitter is going to be dead basically with threads. So it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. But that's how we work with, ChatGPT API, by learning some of the most basic Python syntax. Okay. All right. I think that's all for today's lecture. I skipped this part, but you'll find that in the solution area to work with the Veda library. I hope you guys learned something new, and still have some time. I'll stick around a little bit so you can ask questions. It's already very late for some of you, so yeah, feel free to take a break and then come back, and you'll be able to review the recordings tomorrow morning. Okay. Why is that OpenAI.completion is not working on my end? Honestly, I don't know. Like, if you can send like a screenshot of like the error message you get to Discord, that would be very helpful. When it comes to like TA support, on coding, sometimes like when you ask questions, we need to know more context. When you say it's not working, I really don't know why. What is not working. So have a screenshot that shows like the command or the code that you run, and also in Jupyter Notebook you'll be able to see the output or whatever errors. For example, like, take a screenshot so I know what the error message look like, and then we can help you debug. Okay. Environment variable. The environment variables, for example, I'm not a Windows user, but I'm going to introduce that to you on my Mac. Okay, so right now I'm in the terminal or in a command line, right? So we can set environment variable, right? So it's sort of memorized in the session. So I can say openai API key. Okay, I want to set that to be, let's say, ABC. Okay. The export basically means it's kind of like just set a variable. It's Linux command line, but it's kind of similar to Python, right? Now I would like to print, but in Linux it's like echo. I would like to print this variable. I need to add a $sign in front of it, and it prints out ABC. So now OpenAI API key is set to ABC, right? So if I run this Python script, it's not going to work because this is the wrong key. But in my Python session, it's still valid. Okay. So that's how you set that. But if you would like to set that permanently, like every time you start, for example, if I start a new terminal, I start a brand new terminal, and if I run echo, it's going to print out a different key. That's the actual key. What does this mean? So I have saved my environment variable in a script or a file called the bash RC, or Z shell RC, and it opens up this file, and you can see that I have this command export open API key, and I set the key, right? So that basically means that every time I start my new session in Linux, okay, it's going to set this environment variable OpenAI API key to this value, right? So it automatically set that, and then it's going to sort of memorize that for the session. Okay, that's how you set the one way to set the environment variable. I believe in Anaconda, there's another way you can set that, but you have to open Anaconda Navigator. So let me open that. In Windows, I remember there's you have to go to a place to actually set the environment variable. I have to Google that. I haven't used Windows for a while. How to set? Maybe you can add ChatGPT. Set environment variable in Windows. So every time you start the session, this will always be set, right? So it looks like you need to go to Windows system, go to setting. There's advanced system settings, and you'll see basically go to system properties, advanced, and then there's a button here for environment variables. That's how you set it. Yeah. Okay. What does the usage in OpenAI response represent? Let's see. It's basically it tells you how much tokens you have consumed in this API call, and that's how they're going to keep track of your usage. Basically, you can read the documentation to get more details. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. So for the next lecture, we are going to move on to Python data types. We'll be primarily focusing on list, dictionary, and tuple. So these are very important data types you need to know in order to do well with Python programming. So we'll have some exercises related to ChatGPT as well, because today we only made an API call and we get the response, but we haven't really parsed the response yet, right? Because if you look at the response, that's what we get. But what if you just want to get, the output, you don't care about the usage, right? And then you need to know how to sort of parse it. And this is a dictionary, right? And inside the this is a list. And inside the list, we have a dictionary. And when you work with the API, sometimes you want to submit a list of questions, right? So you need to know how to parse these response data. And that's very important, right? And we need to learn how to, let's say, what if all of your questions and stuff are saved in the CSV file? You would like to open that and you would like to submit a list of questions and things like that. And you start to manipulate data basically, right? So yeah, we'll learn how to do that next weekend. But today sort of, will help us set up for next lecture. At least we know how to work with the APIs and different methods. Yeah. How much code do we need to remember for interview purpose? How much code we need to remember? I don't think you need to memorize these code. But there are things you absolutely need to know. So for example, let's say how to write, data types, right? There are, list, string, dictionary, there are a bunch of them. At least you need to know the core data types. You need to know, okay, there's list, string, dictionary, there's tuple, right? You need to know this. And you don't, a list, let's say we have, let's say we have tweet as a string, right? And it has a bunch of methods. You don't have to memorize these, but you should at least be able to name one or two methods, because that shows that you have worked with a string before. I'm pretty sure you'll memorize some of these, right? Or, if you want to get the length, at least memorize this. That's not hard to memorize, right? But in case you forget, then you just Google how to get the length of the string, right? Or an object. So I don't think you need to memorize a lot of these functions, because you can always just get the hint and you just read the documentation, you'll figure out how to do that. Okay. But it's more important to memorize that, okay, Python has 5 really important data types, and you need to understand the difference, right, between a list and dictionary. If you can't even answer the similarities and differences between list and dictionary, there's no way you can pass the interview, I would say, right? Even though they're not going to ask you this kind of questions, by the way, in an interview, because it's sort of, they expect you to know this already, and you'll do the coding test, right? In the coding test technical round, you'll be given some kind of data type related, questions, and you have to answer them. And if you cannot pass that, you will not be able to talk into the hiring manager. Okay. Can we run a bunch of code on OpenAI, or like a simple line of code? What do you mean by run the code on OpenAI? OpenAI has like a playground where you can actually just like ChatGPT, you can create sessions and add messages and stuff like that. When are you going to use Python to do this? It's when you want to build applications. Let's say you want to build a chatbot, and the chatbot will interact with the ChatGPT API. That's when you're going to use Python. But as an individual user, let's say you would like to do text summarization. If you're a salesperson, you would like to use ChatGPT to write emails and help you, or summarize the emails from a meeting notes. Then you don't have to use Python. You just work with ChatGPT directly, right? It's probably easier. Whenever you want to automate things, whenever you want to scale, then you have to come back to coding right, so that you can automate everything. Yeah. Is that okay if we upgrade Anaconda? Yeah, you can definitely upgrade Anaconda. They'll take care of all the small bugs and stuff, inconsistencies. Sometimes you'll run into some errors, but it should be totally safe to upgrade Anaconda. Um, don't know if I'm alone on uploaded recordings. I'm yet to get the previous video on SQL. The SQL videos have been uploaded to both the Learning Portal and the YouTube. There should be 4 videos. So if you're still going through them, that's fine. But the next 2 weeks, right? This week, next week will be Python. So my recommendation would be, you can do that at the same time or just focus on Python for now because that's what we're going to teach in the next few weeks. And it has nothing to do with SQL, basically. So uh, they're, yeah, they're not conflicting with each other. Can you please have a video on how to set the virtual environment in Anaconda? I probably wouldn't have the time to do that, but I think the best way is just to Google, and I'll find a YouTube video for you. How to set virtual environment in Anaconda. Yeah, but you can do it now. But basically, conda inv, right? And it has a command called list. It lists all Anaconda environment. It's super slow. And then if you would like to create a new environment, let's wait. Why is it so slow? Cool. So I have one environment, right? So if you would like to create a new one, you basically run conda inv create, okay? Conda create. And dash n here means the name. Right, let's say I would like to create a new environment. Let's say new environment, Python 3.11. Okay. And then you will need to set the Python version, right? So Python 3.11. What it's going to do is it's basically going to create a new folder. And it's going to create a new environment called new environment Python 3.11, right? And basically it's going to create a new folder under Anaconda 3/envs. In this folder, right now we have TensorFlow Flask app that I demoed today, but now it's going to add a new folder. Let's give it a try. And it's going to run Python 3.11, right? And this one, the existing TensorFlow one is running Python 3.6. So it essentially means that you can run different versions of Python in isolated environments, and you can install TensorFlow 1 in one environment, you can install TensorFlow 2 in another environment, and they're not going to conflict with each other because all the libraries you're going to install is under this environment folder, right? That's how it works. So it's going to, yeah, install that and just hit yes, and we'll install new environment, okay? Now, once you have multiple environments, what you need to do is just figure out how to switch back and forth between different environments, right? And you have to be careful with that because you don't want to install some software in the wrong environment. So you need to know how to deactivate an environment and reactivate an environment. Okay, so let's wait a little bit. Okay, cool. So it's done. And it's giving some instructions. This is how you activate that, right? So if these site packages, OpenAI. So that's my default environment right now. So I run conda in list. Let's see if we get the new environment set up, and then we will activate that environment. Then it will basically switch to that folder. All right, so now we just added new environment, and the asterisk here shows that you're right now in a base environment, right? Let's do conda activate. Okay. All right, now inside this bracket, you see it's the new environment now. So I'm under the new environment. Remember in the previous environment, in the base environment, I have OpenAI installed, right? So let me run Python in this new environment. It's first of all, it's confirming that it's running Python 3.11. If I run import OpenAI, it's saying that module not found error. So that means we have not installed OpenAI because it's a brand new environment, and I have to run pip install OpenAI again in this new environment, right? That's how great the Python isolated environment is. It's pretty convenient. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask on Discord, and we will upload the recording tomorrow morning. So I hope you guys have a great evening. Bye, guys.